that's in the last 24 hours. So these 10 public schools, all CC private schools, just shut down. Effective. It will. By Monday. Is she? Where's she? She's a sales agent.
The woman you're talking to, right?
Sells our product. She's probably going to sell it.
What are your conditions?
I have the conditions.
And I also have them with a table of contents.
That's right. So, man, that is the consolidated bucket. I don't have a copy of it. That's mine.
No, but then I got it.
Oh, everybody got it. Okay, you're and I think the same way.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry. Nope.
You gonna talk fast?
Got down to 9 minutes.
That's good. You just don't realize till you time yourself.
I caught mine on the main was 22.
Courtney.
No, I always make the architects time themselves because they
Yes, thank you.
they don't have the discipline to understand that thing's at 20%.
All right. Almost ready? We do not have James in our tent. We're not certain, and I don't know.
Blow through.
Sarah may be coming, but she'd be late, but we can start because we have 7.
That was a good suggestion.
No, she's just concerned. Yeah. Okay. All right. We'll wait till Giselle sits down. Okay. Sure. Pass it on. Thank you. Good evening. Welcome to the third evening of the March 2020 meeting of the Arlington County Planning Commission. This month, we had 3 evenings scheduled for our public hearings. Tonight, Thursday, March 12th, we have our 2 remaining items, redevelopment of the Key Bridge Marriott site and PC organizational matters and other business. Anyone wishing to speak on an item this evening must complete and submit a speaker slip to the PC clerk, Giselle Johnson, before the item is called. After the items are presented by county staff and the applicant, speakers will be called 2 at a time. We ask that the second speaker move forward to speak. When it is your turn, please come up to the podium, introduce yourself, and speak clearly into the microphone. The Planning Commission meetings are broadcast live on Arlington TV, and they are video and audio taped to be made available on the county website. Please keep cell phones away from the microphones, including on the tables, as they can cause interfering feedback. Madam Clerk, please call the next item.
Tonight, starting with item number 5A, site plan number 53, 5B, amendment to the master transportation plan, 5C, ordinance of vacation, and this is for the Key Marriott project. We have Dennis Sellon and Brett Wallace to present this item to us this evening.
Welcome, Mr. Wallace. Mr. Sellon.
Thank you. Good evening. Here are the 3 action items that Ms. Johnson just mentioned, first being the site plan amendment, and then the second being the MTP amendment, and the third is the ordinance of encroachment. And we'll go over each one of these in detail. But first, we'll start with the site location. I think everyone is familiar with where the Key Bridge Marriott is located. It's literally at the gateway to Arlington and to Rosslyn. This is an existing aerial plan view. So the property line I want to point out is the dashed red line. The site is currently occupied by the existing Key Bridge Marriott Hotel with 582 hotel rooms. The site is about 5.5 acres. And the first site plan was approved in 1967, and it was last amended in 1986. And there are also 522 surface and structured parking spaces on site. So the surface parking lot is on the east side of the site, and the above-grade parking garage is on the west side of the site. I also wanted to point out there is a resource protection area outlined in the yellow dash line that's around the Colonial Branch tributary, and that begins up in Clarendon and is mostly piped underground and underneath I-66 and Lee Highway, where it then daylights here and then dumps out down the landscape under the GW Memorial Parkway and into the Potomac River. I should also mention Gateway Park is directly across the street, and it's accessed with Sky Bridge, above grade Sky Bridge here. And then this area over here is what we refer to, if you recall in the sector plan, as the Rosslyn Circle. And I will point out that that property, just to the east of the property line there between Fort Myer Drive, is owned by National Park Service. And we'll get into detail about our coordination with them in a minute. The Park Service also owns all of the vegetated land, including where the Colonial Branch is today as well. Just another aerial view of the site looking north. You can see again the Marriott Hotel and the above-grade parking structure. So I'm just going to provide some existing photos just walking around the site. So these are existing photos of the parking structure on the west side of the site. So this is the image on the left is a view just right off of Nash Street and Lee Highway and the Custis Trail. And the image on the right is a view looking west with the Custis Trail on the left, and then the blank facade garage wall that's exposed on the right. Looking back towards the hotel, the image on the left is again looking west. The hotel is here. A lot of the back of house and loading and service is located on this service drive here, which is mostly screened by the concrete ramp and superstructure leading up to that pedestrian bridge over Lee Highway, which you can again see this other view on the right, looking back to the east. So you can see that that ramp and superstructure really does create a barrier to the site and not the best frontage on Lee Highway for the hotel. This is another aerial view looking north again. Just wanted to point out again the property line and the land that's owned by MPS and the existing, there's an existing driveway entrance off of Fort Myer Drive that you can see here. And then there's just another image on the right looking north on the Custis Trail. When it was under construction, you can see this photo. On the north edge of the site, as I mentioned, is mostly comprised of vegetation and steep landscape and topography. I mentioned the Colonial Village branch, which is highlighted here on this slide. And these are just some images from down in the Colonial Village branch looking back up towards the site. So you can see the image on the left. There's the garage structure back there behind the trees. And then there's even the image on the right, so even some standing water and some little rills and spills and rock outcroppings that are unique to this area. And also on the north edge of the site, the view on the left is actually taken from the surface parking lot. So there are some clearings and openings where you can actually see the Potomac River in Georgetown. This photo was taken on the northeastern corner of the site. And then you can see the image on the right. A lot of the vegetation and trees are covered with English ivy and other invasive plant species, which obscure the views. However, there are again, some openings with views of the river. So now we'll just go quickly over the existing GLUP and zoning. The zoning for this site is CO 2.5 mixed-use district. It's 2.5 FAR office commercial, 115 units per acre residential, 180 units per acre hotel. The GLUP, existing GLUP is high medium residential, and that is at 3.24 FAR. And I will mention that the GLUP and the zoning are not aligned with our categories, if you're familiar with the GLUP map and the legend. And we discussed this at length in the LRPC process, but I provided here a quick summary of our analysis. So as I mentioned, the GLUP designation is high medium residential, and while the RA 4.8 district corresponds with high medium residential, CO 2.5 is not listed as a corresponding district. And the GLUP map legend notes that there may be instances where other zoning categories may apply, and the following items provide context regarding the GLUP and the zoning for the site, and those are outlined here. One point is that the hotel use, dating back to the 1959, predates the first print of the GLUP map in 1961, and I did mention the 1987 iteration of the map was when we started to include those corresponding zoning districts. And so given this context and the proposal to add density here where it's mostly residential, staff is supporting the existing hotel use under the current GLUP designation. And additionally, the applicant is not proposing any change to the GLUP or zoning as part of this site plan. In terms of related plans and policies, again, we looked at this at LRPC, but we looked at some of the plans and policies from dating back to the transit plan from 1977, the transit station area study. And while a lot of these plans include the Key Bridge Marriott site, they don't provide any specific guidance for the site. And in fact, some of them actually depict, some of the drawings and the plans depict the site as remaining undeveloped. The Rosslyn sector plan from 2015 is really the most recent policy guidance document that provides guidance for the site. Here in the front cover, illustrative, you can actually see the Marriott site on the bottom right, again shown as undeveloped. And the reason is that in the sector plan, there was a action item to look at the Northern Gateway area. And so, as you can see on the image on the left, the Marriott site is located just outside of the Rosslyn Coordinated Redevelopment District, and it's included in this metro station area, but again, outside of the RCRD. And the Gateways area is identified in the image on the bottom right, so it's looking at the features and locations on this slide. So again, I mentioned the action item in the sector plan calling for staff to conduct a study, a planning effort for this area, and looking at relationships with the Esplanade, the Boathouse, the Mount Vernon Trail, Gateway Park, air rights development, and in the future National Monument Memorial Site. And the sector plan does mention in quotations below the efforts to advance those plan recommendations, such as improvements to Gateway Park, should not be precluded by the interest in completing such a coordinated planning effort. So I'll talk to this in a minute, but that's part of the reason why we went to the Long Range Planning Committee, is to look at this site in context of those other areas within the Northern Gateway area and talk about what could be appropriate for this site. The sector plan also has guidance for Gateway Park. This is a image taken from the plan, and I've highlighted the text, but in terms of the future visioning for Gateway Park, the park is envisioned really to be an at-grade park, and so it proposes the removal of all the concrete ramps and superstructures that exist today on both the north and, the west and east sides of the park that's split by Fort Myer Drive. And in addition, the sector plan also calls out specifics for building height, specifically maintaining and preserving views from the Central Place observation deck towards the National Cathedral, Georgetown, and the Potomac River. So in terms of the master transportation plan and looking at this proposal, we're looking for, the applicant is implementing Corps of Rosslyn study recommendations along North Fort Myer Drive. You'll see in a minute provision of new on-street, off-street bicycling facilities, provision of a capital bike share station, and support facilities for parking and lockers and visitor parking. And then for pedestrians, the applicant is proposing removal of that sky bridge over Lee Highway, the ramps and superstructure, and then widening sidewalks along Fort Myer Drive, as well as removing that driveway entrance that we saw earlier off of Fort Myer Drive. Some other considerations. I mentioned earlier the future National Monument Memorial Sites. So the Rosslyn Circle that we identified earlier is identified by the National Capital Planning Commission as a potential future candidate site for a monument or a memorial. And that's shown here with the red arrow. And in our consultations with both federal agencies, MPS and NCPC, their main concern with this project has mostly been about the visual impacts of the building heights as it relates to the George Washington Memorial Parkway and views from other national park sites such as Roosevelt Island. So, and again, I mentioned the invasive species and some of the vegetation, so further coordination with National Park Service will be important for this project going forward. So in terms of the site plan proposal, again, I mentioned the applicant's not proposing any change to the GLUP or the zoning. They're proposing a partial demolition and renovation of the existing 12-story hotel with 445 hotel units and 3 new 16-story residential buildings. The one west residential building, which sits on top of the existing parking garage with 300 units, and then the east residential buildings, which is essentially 2 towers on 1 podium with 151 units. And then the addition of 2 new streets, and we'll talk about that in a minute when we talk about the amendment to the MTP. And then in addition, public open spaces along with public access easements for the area called the Esplanade and the East Park area, and then public access for a overlook on top of the existing garage, which I'll let the applicant present in a minute. In terms of modifications for the project proposal, the proposing density exclusions for storage and below grade mechanical. And these exclusions are justified in that they don't add any additional height or massing or bulk to the new buildings. The parking ratios are proposed to be reduced 0.93 spaces per unit for residential, and 0.48, we provide a range here of 0.48 to 0.54 spaces per unit for hotel, and then a reduced compact parking ratio as well. And so given the proximity to Metro, as well as all the excellent walking and bicycling amenities around the sites, staff supports the parking modifications as outlined here. And in terms of additional density, per our zoning ordinance section 1559, we're looking at 74 residential units above density and 43 hotel units. And then LEED silver for the hotel and LEED gold for both or all three of the residential buildings. The applicant is also providing a contribution to the Affordable Housing Fund and contributions to off-site open space improvements and on-site public open spaces that I mentioned with public access easements, and the removal of the pedestrian bridge over Lee Highway, and again, the Capitol Bike Share Station. And so that density is outlined here in this tabulation table here, so you can see the residential unit, the breakdown of residential and hotel, what the proposed number of units over the base, and how we get to that 74 additional residential and 43 hotel. The 43 hotel units are picked up with the LEED silver credits, which leaves the additional 34 units to be achieved through zoning ordinance section 1559. In terms of issues with the site plan review and the process, we have identified no outstanding policy issues. We have heard some concerns from the community to the west of the site over on North Oak Street for the undergrounding of 4 utility poles on the east side of North Oak Street. County staff and the county manager have met, and we're open to talking with those residents outside of this site plan discussion to see if we can come to some kind of resolution on that matter. And then identified on the graphic on the bottom of the screen for transportation, we're just pointing out some potential for conflicts for bikes and peds and vehicles at the 2 new entrances to the project site where it crosses over the Custis Trail. And that's something that we're actively looking at for ways in which we can mitigate those conflicts with signage or materials. So that's something we can discuss if needed. So item number 2 on the agenda this evening, I mentioned, is the MTP Amendment to add new sections of street, North Nash Street, North Meade Street, just north of Lee Highway. And so this is the MTP Map Amendment here. So again, you can see the 2 new streets added here in white and pointed out. It makes a whole lot of sense to call the street on the west North Nash Street because it's directly aligned with the existing North Nash Street. The street on the east, we're calling at the moment North Meade Street to conform with our street naming policy. The North Nash Street will be an urban center local street, or actually both streets will be urban center local streets. The third item on the agenda is the ordinance of encroachment to permit the encroachment of portions of balconies over an existing easement for public street and utility purposes. The 2 new portions of two portions of an easement for the public street and utilities purposes recorded in 1972 are totaling about 2,799 square feet. They're necessary to construct underground garage and above-grade portions of the east residential building. They're not currently utilized for public street and utility purposes, and the applicant will compensate the county for fair market value of portions of the easement. Those easements or vacations are depicted here on this exhibit. Now, in terms of the public process, I mentioned we began this really with the Long Range Planning Committee. We had 2 meetings in September and October The first meeting included a walking tour. We discussed the site history and previous uses on the site. Some of the images on the right side of the screen show some of the historical images showing the former Arlington Brewery, the Hot Shops restaurant. You can see the Rosslyn Circle and the trolley turntable there off of Key Bridge. And then mentioned that the brewery was then converted to a cherry smash cola plant in the 1920s. So we talked about a lot of the site history. Again, some of this history is throughout the process, staff encouraged the applicant to look for ways that they could celebrate the history through the architecture of the landscape because of this just unique site and great opportunity. We also went through the GLUP and zoning history for the site and then looked at the planning and policy history as well. We also provided an LRPC site analysis looking at circulation and access, open space and natural areas, and then building envelopes and looking at how the site might lay out conceptually. We then went to SPRC. We had 3 meetings, ending with the last one in January. There have been 2 Transportation Commission meetings, the last one being last Thursday on March 5th. The Transportation Commission recommended approval with a vote of 9-0 to 1. We met with the Disability Advisory Committee February 18th, E2C2 February 24th, Urban Forestry February 27th, and we were going to meet with Housing Commission tonight, but the meeting was canceled. And here we are, and we're looking at a county board meeting on March 24th. I will say throughout the LRPC and SPRC process, the applicant was very responsive to, I think, both staff and the committee's suggestions throughout the process. And so with that, we recommend approval for the site plan amendment and approval for the MTP amendment, and then find that the proposed vacations are substantially in accord with the comprehensive plan or applicable portion thereof. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace. Anything else from staff or Mr. Sullen? Nothing? Thank you. Hello, Ms.
Madam
Walsh.
Chair, members of the commission, for the record, my name is Nan Walsh, and I'm very pleased to be here this evening on behalf of the applicant, Woodridge Capital. I'm going to be extremely brief because I want to leave our architects all of our time. With me this evening is Aaron Locke, who is representing Woodridge Capital. He just flew in today from LA. Mark Dubik, who's the local developer with Dubal. We have Maurice Walters and Gary Handel, our architects. Patrick Funikin did the architecture from Cooper Carey. OVS Landscape, we have Sarah Downing and Sheila Brady. I think it's fair to say that this case has had a really, really positive vibe as we've gone through it. And I was thinking that it might be because it's a straight up CO 2.5 site plan amendment. We don't have any rezonings like we usually do, and GLUP amendments. However, what I came to realize is that the talent of the design team for this case is the reason for the positive reception that we've gotten to date. From the outset of the original planning for this site by our team, the basics, where to introduce the street grid, where to integrate the open spaces, where to place the buildings, how to orient the buildings, how to connect the site to the bike and pedestrian network, how to connect the site to Rosslyn. The entire roadmap from the outset was done well, and it was done right. And these fundamental design features were reinforced by the 2 LRPC meetings and the comments at those meetings. Things were in the right place. As to the particulars, again, we have 3 expert architects, one for the apartment building, one for the hotel renovation and new construction, and one for the condominiums. Our goal, while being to achieve a variety of housing types as well as a variety of architecture, was at the same time to create a cohesive site plan, particularly at the ground plane. And that's where OVS, our landscape architects, came in. Their respect for and celebration of the natural setting in which the site sits, the water, the rocks, the trees, the whole works is, in my experience, unprecedented in terms of the way they have honored it. Another important element of this plan was to celebrate the history of the site, starting with its industrial origins, which ranged from a brewery in the late 1800s to a cherry smash soda company in the 1900s, and ultimately in the mid-1900s, a hot shop and then a hot shop motel, which became our beloved Key Bridge Marriott. Maurice has been very excited and engaged in incorporating features in our design that celebrate the history of the site, while at the same time having these elements also serve as a secondary purpose that improves our plan. Finally, giving back to the community public access to the views in a comfortable, inviting setting overlooking the treetops toward the Colonial Branch Creek was another key element in making this a well-balanced site plan. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to our architects.
Thank you. Good evening. Glad to be here tonight. Representing a really talented design team, as Nan mentioned. So I'm going to walk you through the site plan, the West Residential and the hotel, and then Gary Handel from Handel Architects will come up and finish up with the East Residential. Next slide. So here we are looking from the southeast at the site, and you can see, as Brett pointed out, the parking lot on the east is now a site for the condominium as well as our East Park. The hotel, the towers remained, the 4-story buildings have been removed, and they've been reclad. And the big piece of the hotel is that the entrance has been moved to the south to Lee Highway. So it'll have much more prominence from the south and a much stronger relationship to Rosslyn. We'll look at that in closer detail as we move around the building. And then lastly, moving to the west, you see the West Residential building that sits on top of the existing 3-story garage. So that's a 16-story building, but it's actually 13 stories on top of the garage. And then you can get a little sense of the bars. It continues on to the west, tapers down to 12 stories. Another important feature, as Brett had hinted at, is the ramp and the bridge have now been removed, and that helps to open up the project to Lee Highway much better. Okay, next. So here we are back over the bridge looking down. Same thing you can see where the East Residential occupies the existing parking lot as well as there's the new East Park. And then probably the most exciting component of the project is the Esplanade space that's on the north. So you'll see today it is just it's parking lots and there's no activity out there. So this will be greatly transformed. Really a fantastic opportunity for a connection to nature and all the kind of wonderful views to the north. Also, the hotel is completely reoriented where public spaces will open up to this area. And then lastly, the West Residential again. Next. Okay. As Nan mentioned, OVS has developed this kind of wonderful story of the landscaping that's based on the location in the landscape, kind of the juncture of the coastal plain, fall zone, and the Piedmont. And next. And then they've have these concepts of how that informs the textures of the paving and the planting on the site that are really wonderful. So if you want to hear more about that, we could bring them up later to talk about that. Okay, the site amenities on the site. So the East Park over here, and we've got a detail that we can show you, very important. Also, really important is we're making a new connection at the north side of the East Residential from Fort Myer to go across the north side of that building and tie into the Esplanade, which will allow a connection into the site. We've got the Esplanade, and we'll look at that in more detail in just a second. We have Nash Street, Meade Street, and then in the new lane in front of the hotel that creates the frontage on Lee Highway. Next. Okay, here we are at the Esplanade. So it's a real rich kind of layered space. So at the hotel, we now have a restaurant with outdoor dining. The lobby will open up to there, and also the hotel ballroom and pre-function will all open up. And because of the topography of the site, those areas are just a couple feet higher than the natural grade down in the Esplanade. So there'll be a little bit of slope sidewalks, very gentle, a few steps, and another slope sidewalk that'll lead down to that lower level. Then it's arranged with kind of an intermediate area that's kind of a little quieter and contemplative. It'll have a little water feature and seating, and then you kind of move out into the main Esplanade that's kind of got two parts. It's got a 10-foot two-way bike path right here, inboard. And this was a development that came about in the SPRC process, kind of getting those in the right orientation. And then the pedestrian path, the desire is to have that kind of out at the northern end, closer to nature and the views. So that's out there on the outer edge. Next. Okay. Moving around the East Park, again, this kind of crescent-shaped amphitheater park in here. Also, very importantly, is that the existing sidewalk is being widened to 14 feet and straightened out from its current condition to kind of increase the capacity. And also you see the shared use path across the north. Additionally, there is a little kind of pocket park being created beside the Custis Trail, which will have the new Capitol bike share station. Next. Now we're going to move to the West Residential. Next. Okay, so the building, the main bar of it, the 16 stories, runs north-south into the site along Nash Street. And then again, it tapers down to 12 stories on the other side. The primary form of the building is a series of these kind of sawtooth bays that angle to the north that will allow the building to have these really great views of the river and across to Georgetown. So that's kind of the most important kind of form giver. It also is treated with a pair of terracotta tower at the main entrance and lobby, as well as terracotta cladding kind of on the other side there. And we'll talk about the bottom of it down we get down to the bottom. Also, it has a very rich roofscape with lots of amenities and landscaping for the residents. Next. Okay, going down to the ground plane. So today, when you come in on the Nash Street alignment off of Lee Highway, immediately the sidewalks are really too steep to meet any kind of requirements for ADA. And the grade for the cars is very steep. You have to kind of come in quickly and then immediately turn into the garage. It doesn't allow for kind of graceful queuing. So very importantly, this building is going away, this wall is going away, Nash Street goes into the site, and then it will look like this. So you'll come in, we'll have the lobby entrance to the West Residential right here. The street's graded out much more gradually. The entrance to the garage is moved way back here, deeper in the site. So it'll allow for cars to kind of move more gently into the site and stack, and we don't have to worry about any potential traffic issues there. Next. Okay, moving out onto the Custis Trail to the west. We're approaching the building. You start to see a little bit of the garage here. One of the really nice things in the SPRC process is they kind of challenged us to work on this facade a little bit. I think we made some nice little tweaks and it got a lot better. Good. Okay, so now we've moved a little farther to the east, and Brett had shown you that existing garage facade, which we have another view here in the lower right. It's a solid concrete wall, but it does have this interesting planter at the top. So we want to take that planter, kind of recondition it, replant it, and then on that solid wall, we want to do a living wall, a green wall. That's a south-facing facade. It's a great place to do something like that. It'll always get sunlight, and it'll be kind of fascinating as you go by on the trail. It'll be something interesting to look at. And we've got a couple examples, of what those look like when they're kind of established on the upper right. Next. Moving around on to Nash Street, North Nash Street on the site. So we do have a portion between kind of the entry tower and the north side where the garage is revealed. And again, in the SPRC process, the challenge of incorporating historical elements came up. And what we've developed is this idea of kind of etching the historical images on perforated metal panels. Those will both let the garage breathe, but they also give us a nice kind of canvas to put these images in. There's a real wealth of images that we found. We're just showing a sampling of some with the images of the brewery as well as the trolley cars out on Lee Highway. So we think that'll be a really wonderful effect to kind of put those in so as you move into the site, they're a little kind of surprise. Go next. Okay, and then moving to the north. On the left is currently the condition of the north side of the garage. Obviously, that's all kind of cleaned up, and Nash Street comes through. And then another thing through the SPRC process was this introduction of the overlook, with this really strong desire to be able to kind of enjoy the Colonial Village Branch Stream Valley as well as the views to the north. So what we've done is we've developed an area on the top of the garage that you'll be able to go up to, and then we introduced this kind of monumental stair on the north side that kind of is a sign for the overlook. And actually, after our last SPRC, one comment was to try to make it a little more inviting, so we've kind of extended the landing out as a canopy, and we're showing a, a concept for a sign there to help draw you up. There also will be access through an elevator and a stair from within the garage that'll also bring you up there. So next. This is a plan of that area. There'll be 2,500 square feet covered and about another 1,400 square feet open to the sky. And there's also, some other, some toilet facilities up there and such. Next. So here's a view. You're up on the overlook, and you have views down into the Colonial Village branch there. Also, there will be a screen wall that will screen the view of the parking adjacent. Next. Okay, moving into the middle of the site, the hotel. The existing facade, we all know it, a lot of exposed concrete. You'll see Cooper Carey's done a really fantastic job of kind of recladding that to make it look better, but also make it much more efficient. Next. Okay, Brett had shown this slide, but just to quickly reiterate, when you come into the site on the Meade Street alignment, you've got the barrier of the ramp and the stair. You've got all the service, the loading and trash. That's what you get immediately. All of this is being removed and greatly transformed to this. So now you'll be looking down. You get the front entrance, you see, to the hotel's right here. This is kind of the drop-off area for vehicles. A new beautiful glass and aluminum canopy. And here you see the new cladding for the facades above, and then a new cafe space at the corner here that'll open up both to the south and over towards Meade, and that will have an outdoor dining or seating area out there. Next. Moving around to the north side, this is the condition that exists today. It's a parking lot. There is no activation there. All of this is being removed. Next. And that all becomes the Esplanade. So we'll have the new dining room for the restaurant with outdoor terrace. The lobby will flow through. The ballroom will flow through. This is that kind of intermediate area that I spoke about for seating and water, and the little gentle sloped sidewalks that lead up. And then you see the progression out to the bicycle path and the pedestrian path that is outboard. Next. Moving over to the west side of the north side, again, same condition, no activity, just a parking lot transformed to this. So there's that upper terrace. This is kind of that intermediate area with the water feature and the seating in here. Next. And then moving back just a little bit farther to the west, you can see the ballroom. You see how the bike paths come in off of Nash Street, and also the pedestrian path outboard. Next. And then lastly, at the southwest corner of the hotel, you have the new lane across the front coming there, so very active. And there will be a secondary entrance into the hotel that will have access to the parking across Nash Street, and also it's a good drop-off kind of access to the meeting rooms. The meeting rooms and the conference are there, so it's kind of a secondary or side entrance. Just to kind of recap that all on the plan. So here's the south side, here's the lane parallel to Lee Highway, the new main entrance. So now when you enter the hotel, you'll see right through the lobby out to nature to really kind of, enhance that connection to nature. We have the new cafe at the corner with its outdoor area. There's a lounge that'll have an outdoor area. That's all behind the sidewalk. The restaurant will have a pedestrian entrance from the outside too to activate Meade Street. And then of course, the outdoor dining we talked about, the lobby flowing out, the ballroom. Moving back around to the side, we do have our loading, and then that secondary entrance that I mentioned. So I'll turn it over to Gary Handel now to talk about.
Great, next. And I'll go fast. So here you can see the East Residential towers. As mentioned, 2 towers, 151 units, 77 in one, 74 in the other, looking back towards the Potomac next. The idea here is really to create an appropriate gateway and entrance into Rosslyn and to frame the new memorial park that could happen. You can see how the buildings have been shaped in order to do that, but our goal is to do that in a new way. We'll explain. Go next. And so here you can see how the curving facades of the building that face the park actually begin to shape the space. And if you remember the colonnade that you saw in Brett's image, that would be in the center of that space. And the center of that is the center of our curve next. And so the goal is to frame that space, a fairly classical idea, but in a modern way. And so we were inspired by the ideas of Edward O. Wilson in terms of biophilia, as translated by Kellert in his great book, Biophilic Design. Natural shapes and forms are often sinuous, flowing, and adaptive in response to forces and pressures found in nature. And that's really the pressure of the space impacting on the building here. Go next. And here you can see, again, from Kellert, people nonetheless generally prefer designs that resemble the tendency of organic forms to resist hard mechanical edges, straight lines, and angles. Here, we're on one of the residential balconies looking up Mead Street, and you can see the sinuous counterpoint with the hotel facades as we look towards towards Lee Highway. Go next. And here, we're at the entrance to the Esplanade. You can see that on the right. And then we're inspired by, with OVS, with the coloration of the Potomac River Mather Gorge, the soft grays, and earth tones there. And so the palette of our materials evokes that with light gray precast concrete, oak, and a gray limestone, which is really beautiful, and we have some samples for it. We also want to introduce Carteret stone, which is what the gorges are made out of. Go next. And so here you can see the entrance to North Mead Street, and you can see the pomegranate-colored tulips that we have there. And then you can see the integration of that sinuous form with the organic landscape and how those curves interplay with the space. Go next. And then here you can see the entrance, which is between the two towers there. And you can see through this entrance to a feature there with specimen trees that leads you out to the East Residential Park. Go next. The plan here showing how it integrates into the OVS landscape, amenities lining the Custis Trail and the East Park, the entrance to the residential building service components at the back of the site. You can see that through lobby with the feature. Go next. The plans show the integration of the landscape elements on the second floor, intensely planted. You can see the cutout with the specimen trees will come through, and then the roof plan there with mechanical and amenity spaces also intensely planted. Go next. And then finally, I'm under time. You can see I have 30 seconds. You can see the rooftop amenity and mechanical space, and again, the interplay of that sinuous curve looking back towards the more traditional skyline of Rosslyn and the integration of those planters. We really love the little detail of our slab edge there, which actually reinforces the movement of that curve. I would also like to second Maurice's thank you to my time with many of you on the SPRC meetings. It was informative, helpful, and made it a better project, so thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Handel. Mr. Walters? Madam Clerk, do we have public speakers for this item?
We have 4 speakers this evening. The first speaker is Scott Goodwin, followed by Robert Pillsbury.
Good evening, Planning Commissioners. We appreciate this opportunity to share our thoughts and concerns regarding the Keybridge Marriott redevelopment, site plan number 53. As a longtime homeowner in Palisades Park, the community closest and most directly affected by this project, we believe our perspective is a unique one. From the beginning, we have engaged extensively and constructively with all stakeholders. During such meetings, we have expressed our support for this project because we believe it will help serve as a catalyst for further development in the Rosslyn sector, even though we will have to endure several years of construction, related noise, traffic, and parking issues. The 3 most important points for us will be covered by Bob Pillsbury as the Vice President of our association. Therefore, I will not repeat those here. We have provided the Planning Commission with a detailed letter and background information that we feel will help explain these issues further, including cost estimates for the utility undergrounding as previously provided to all parties. As part of the community benefits package, we are requesting that the applicant's contribution to the underground utility fund be utilized to underground these lines with any difference coming from other appropriate sources. Please keep in mind that virtually all other road, intersection, bike path, sidewalk, traffic signal, streetlights, signage, landscaping, and other related transportation improvements have already been made on the Lee Highway perimeter of this site due to the Custis Trail project. Therefore, what might have otherwise become in whole or in part the applicant's expense has nearly been completed. Since a substantial amount of utility work will already be planned for the site, it makes the most economic sense for the county to include this work at the same time in keeping with the master transportation plan to underground all utilities. These are the only remaining above-ground utility poles in the area. These improvements will benefit the applicant's property just as much as the rest of the surrounding community. We do want to see the applicant make a good faith effort to work with the National Park Service on the Colonial Run Hollow section to make this diamond in the rough an attractive retreat for many Arlingtonians, including those new residents on the site and hotel guests. One final point. As discussed most recently at SPRC 3, we support the planning commissioners and others who raised concerns about the options to improve the currently bare lower roof lines on the north side of the hotel. Options could include green roofs, open patio space, or other architectural features that could improve the views for all on the site. As the applicant has done a nice job with the roof decks on the apartment and condo buildings, we hope they would maintain the same consistency with the hotel roofs, including the top level. Otherwise, a great opportunity could be missed. In closing, we ask for your support of our priorities to move this community to improve this community for all citizens of Arlington. We believe our request will dramatically enhance the area around the project and will further bolster the sleek new gateway into Arlington. Thank you for hearing our concerns for the future of our neighborhood while simultaneously expressing support for the overall project plans. Thank you.
Thank you.
Robert Pillsbury is followed by Tom Corns.
Commissioners, county staff, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Bob Pillsbury. I am Vice President of the Palisades Park Owners Association. Our president, Rick Schul, would have been here addressing the commission, but he has self-quarantined because of exposure to the COVID-19, and he sends his regrets. So thank you for letting me speak. We are a townhome community of 129 homes and the closest neighbors to the proposed redevelopment. As a matter of fact, my house is the one you see in the pictures, and I get the view of the parking garage at the moment. On the whole, we support the plan and the redevelopment of the site. We think the proposals have an exciting potential for upgrading the gateway into Rosslyn. Having said that, we do have a few concerns. My colleague, Scott Goodwin, mentioned some of them. One of the ones that I would add is we want to make sure that the usual site plan requirements on parking, safety, staging be included. I assume they are, but we just want to put our 2 cents in on that. The undergrounding of the utility poles on our stretch of North Oak Street is a priority for us. I will address that in a little detail later. The cleanup and maintenance of the Colonial Branch is a very important thing, particularly with, I was very pleased to see the changes to the overlook, so that overlook will be in that area. Finally, we have a left turn lane out on North Oak onto Lee Highway. We want to make sure that it's maintained. An earlier SPRC presentation did not show it, and we were assured that it was just a CAD/CAM system error. We hope that was the case. As far as the site plan conditions, one of the things we are concerned about is staging of equipment on the relatively short and not very wide North Oak Street prior to entering the construction site. Another is the potential parking problem associated with contractors during the construction and overflow parking from the apartments during the special events. We are a site plan ourselves and are not allowed permitted parking. So the limited street parking for our guests and members is at a premium. As far as the undergrounding goes, the 4 poles do not serve us as power anymore. That has been rerouted from Clarendon. I believe the Air Force Association, which is our closest neighbor, does get their power from those. When our development was passed the county board in the mid-1990s, there were a condition that the developer put $98,000 into an undergrounding fund, and an additional condition that he underground all the utilities on the property and its periphery. This was overlooked, and we feel that the county did not serve us well at that point, and now 25 years later, you have the opportunity to correct that oversight. KBM redevelopment is contributing a $313,000 to an undergrounding fund, and we would request that that be earmarked for helping to underground those poles. We were very pleased to hear the willingness of the staff and the county manager to continue to discuss this option, so thank you. Finally, the cleanup and maintenance of the Colonial Branch. It is NPS property. We have worked with them to clean it up and remove invasives. It is a quite lovely little pocket park that would greatly serve the area. Finally, I just wanted to thank you for allowing us to express our concerns and the support for the redevelopment. 30 seconds early.
Thank you, Mr. Pillsbury.
Tom Corns is followed by Benjamin Kinney.
Welcome, Mr. Corns.
Hello, I'm not certain how much time I'll have, but no, we'll go with 3. Great. So I'll get right to the point this time. The public overlook has a 4-foot-high concrete wall. The length of it, except for where the stairway comes through. The drawing, you didn't ask, it looked like there might be a transparency on part of it. It was not mentioned by the developer tonight, and I haven't been able to confirm that the concrete has been replaced by glass. But unless it is, that space will not be useful as an overlook. The 4-foot wall, especially if one's seated, completely obscures the view into the valley, which is the view here. It's highly wooded. You'll get glimpses in the long distance, but that valley is absolutely gorgeous, and it doesn't look so good with the vines that are hanging up there, but it's really great, and it's wonderful, and it would be worth it if that wall was transparent. In addition, that bicyclists are likely to be the biggest users of this space. There's no bicycle parking provided that I could see. There seems to be space underneath the stairway, so forth, but definitely that's someplace, ideally there or outside, it needs to be done. And also, ideally, the space itself where they show tables on the flat space looking towards the wall would be terraced somewhat. Ideally, I've shown pictures of the amphitheater in New York on High Line that is accessible to anyone and pitches people so that it directs the view down into the valley, which is worthwhile. And then finally, we got really excited at the first site plan meeting about this having access to the view, and a beer garden got mentioned, and there was a lot of cheers about that. In December, it wasn't there, and there wasn't any motion in direction of public access. We were very happy in January that we accomplished this access, but it really needs to be more. And I think that restrooms are called for. Water for that bar, and restrooms for the people who pass by. That will make it useful for us. That will make it public benefit.
Thank you, Mr. Corns.
Thank you.
Benjamin Kinney.
Benjamin Keeney with North Highlands Civic Association. I won't repeat everything that's been said already. The Palisades Park Homeowners Association has iterated most of the issues or comments that I heard throughout the neighborhood. A couple other people had mentioned that a public roof deck would be nice, at least if the market would bear it. Our understanding is that when a site plan is approved, the density is approved, and theoretically, the use could change up there. So I think that, it's something that I guess could be encouraged, but not necessarily required. Undergrounding adjacent utilities was especially pressed by Palisades Park. We heard a little bit of rumblings about that from some of the other neighbors. The utilities that they're talking about, and I think in the handout that was provided, they're not technically on the developer site, but the request, I think, is just to try to earmark some of the contribution to go to that section of utilities. The invasive species have been mentioned, but I would love to reiterate how bad they are. It's realistically the whole 66 corridor, the Lee Highway, where everything starts, it's a mess. And I think that, our community has pitched in. Maybe there's something we could do to, help. I think there's a conversation that could be had there. The standard site plan conditions, I think, are typically met. I think this area has been getting a lot better with some of the attention that has been paid to some of the crosswalks in the areas, especially the intersection of Doom. I think benefited a lot from an early pedestrian signal. And little things like that are just, computer programs that can usually be done. But I think we trust that, staff has looked through that. We support the staff report, what we've seen of it. We commend the applicant, and I think they have a very masterful design team. OVS has done a fabulous job, and overall, we're very supportive of what we see. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Mr. Kinney. Madam Clerk, is that it for our public speakers? Are there any members of appointed commissions that would like to speak? I see Mr. Sarley from Park and Rec.
Good evening. I'm Leo Sarley, and I'm here on behalf of the Parks and Recreation Commission, and we have participated in the site plan, the SPRC, and the LPRC before that. We want to commend the project on the discussions of the biophilic and the sort of open space planning. We appreciate that the design team has been cognizant of the gateway aspect of it and has treated the design with some intent, particularly relative to the National Park Service site in the center in front of it. We would be curious, or we're slightly disappointed with the notion of not having seen a listing of all the plants. We're really interested in having those be particularly natives, just for us to sort of make sure that the biophilic concepts are being carried through all the way. We support the design in providing the pedestrian and bicycle circulation around the site. We think that's a major compliment to both the site and the community, and we want to encourage that and maintain that as best we can. We already spoke about the NPS property, and so the other thing is the Gateway Park. I think the Gateway Park has a major connection to this particular property also, and I think it would be important for the contributions to go to that park. And one of the issues I think that hasn't been fully discussed on the SPRC was the notion of dog parks and dog runs. I think that's something that ought to be tracked through. But we do understand that Gateway Park also provides an opportunity for a dog run. Finally, a bit of a request from the Parks Commission. We would love to see a presentation post-approval of the open space in particular. I guess I should address staff on that, if possible, in the coming month or two, just so we can update all the commission members on the final result of the project. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Sarley. Any other commissions? With that, this matters with the commission. Do we have a TC report, Commissioner Lantelmi?
Yes, the Transportation Commission heard this at its meeting last Thursday, March 5th. The discussion points included the parking ratio for the buildings, which the Commission tended to think was a bit high, especially on the condos, given how transit-rich this area is. Walking distance to the subway, to number of bus lines, very bikeable, and probably the busiest bike route in the county. Another area of concern was the possible pedestrian bike traffic conflicts along Lee Highway where the two new streets come through. Is there some sort of design way that that could be made easier for everybody involved, both the traffic in and out and the people and bicyclists going across it? There'll be definitely more people walking through here if this comes through, which is exactly what we want, but we want to do it safely. There is a recognition that there's going to be an awful amount of construction in this area. This isn't the only project. Across Gateway Park, there'll be a big project. Beyond that, Ames is going to be coming up. There's a lot in the pipeline right here, and that's going to take a lot of very exquisite coordination among the different construction sites. The commission likes the bike pedestrian promenade. It's a wonderful amenity. It's going to work very well. There's a little bit of concern over the lack of full east-west porosity if we can't get that full easement from the Park Service to connect up the promenade to Key Bridge. But overall, the Transportation Commission approved this, recommended that it go forward. The vote was 9 in favor, no objections, and 1 abstention.
Thank you, Commissioner Lantelmi. Commissioner Bagley, we're ready for your SPRC report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I want to take a moment to thank our public speakers for coming. A couple of you, I've seen you at all the meetings since the start. Thank you for that. I see there's a Dakota rep as well. And we're in a process here. And I think most of us recognize that because of the input from everybody, including you, you're going to live next to it, makes the final product, which we're looking at tonight, much better than when we started. So I want to congratulate you for staying with this. We're going to talk more about it as we get into this. But again, thank you for your time and making the effort to come to all of these, especially tonight, given what's going on the planet. Also want to take a second to recognize former Commissioner Giacomini, who was extremely instrumental in this, and I was shadowing her at the beginning of this. Can never step into her shoes. And I specifically want to mention, because I took the tour, not the guided tour that we all did, I took the naturalist tour with her into the ravine and all of the other things and lived through it. And I wanted to, and again, that stayed forefront of this discussion, how incredible this setting is and that we needed to do proper homage to it. Thank you all for doing that. But I wanted to take the moment to recognize her impact on this, which will be hopefully felt for many years. I also want to thank the staff who has worked very hard on this, Mr. Wallace and Mr. Sellon in particular. And again, this is a process that at the end, maybe it's not perfect, but it's a heck of a lot better than it would have been had we not sat through all these meetings and done this. So thank you. To that point, I'm not going to go through all the things you will see in the report that I gave you. We discussed many things back and forth. And pretty much every time we went to the applicant, they were responsive in some manner, and we appreciate that. Particularly with understanding with the setting what a gateway this really is, to make it as impressive as possible to that. And also to incorporate, for those of you who haven't seen the history of this site, I would encourage you to go look at what HALRB put together for this. It's an amazing history there. So, and the fact that you gave a nod to it and we're excited to run with that, we appreciate that. And on the biophilic, we had asked you, and we have been charged, as all other staff, commission, everybody else here, with making sure that we take a special nod to energy moving forward and also biophilia. All the suggestions were go and do that and come back to us. Your presentation, in my opinion, will now be the one that I point other applicants to try to meet that standard. So I do appreciate that. It was very well received, and we really appreciate that. Having said that, I think we can just skip right into, because some of these things have been talked about, but I wanted to talk about some of the possible topics that we would talk about here now, which you can see as I've outlined for you. One of those is, although staff and the county manager do want to continue the conversation about the utility poles, should we discuss that a little bit more? Also, throughout the conversation, and you saw from the pictures the extent of the invasive species there. And if we don't address it, what happens there? So I would like to talk about what do we do that, because at the end of the day, this really should be a public benefit to be able to see out and to see those things. So we want to talk about that. And then what if that doesn't happen, and then what are we replacing them with from a native standpoint? Also, to review the pedestrian crossings at Lee, at Fort Myer, and also North Nash. Is there anything else that we can do to discourage pedestrians from winging it on their own without going to those intersections? Again, and this was talked about a little bit, potential traffic delays at North Nash and North Mead Streets can be monitored, possibly addressed in the future, and I know a lot of that staff will respond to. There have been questions about what should and should not be community benefits, and I would think that we need to review those and just make sure that everyone's on the same page with that. And are there any opportunities for public access of hotel and rooftop views, which had been brought up in the past? So.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Commissioner Bagley, especially for taking on such an exciting but complicated SPRC so early in your tenure with us. With that, and with the comments that we heard from the public and our commission member, I'm going to propose an outline, and then I'll ask you to let me know if I've forgotten anything, and then we'll get into our discussion. So I'll suggest that we start with something like open space sustainability. Here we can talk about the public overlook, the issues that Mr. Corns raised, the desire for the listing of native plants. And here I don't think it's an oversight as much as we're all very excited to see what you're proposing. Options for green roofs on the hotel, including public access for the hotel rooftop, and questions about cleanup and maintenance of the colonial branch, the status of the discussions and the process and timing with NPS, the removal, and again, options if that doesn't move forward. Then we can talk about transportation, the potential conflicts at the site entrances and the Custis Trail, pedestrian bike cars, the left turn lane from North Oak to Lee Highway, the potential traffic delays, and the issue, again, that Mr. Corns raised about bike parking for overlook users, and then construction and phasing, parking, safety, staging equipment. We did go over this a little bit at SPRC, but it's fair enough to raise that now, and I think this will be very quick. And the coordination of all the concurrent development that's coming up in Rosslyn. And then the community benefits. Here, I think what we'll need, Mr. Wallace, is just an explanation from you as to what we typically get with a major site plan amendment in terms of community benefits for base and bonus density, or however you want to explain that. But just to make the distinction for us, since this is a little different from the sort of SPRCs we normally see in terms of the magnitude of community benefits, and then the discussion of underground and utility poles. Would anybody like to add anything? Commissioner Schroll?
I have some questions about the south facade of the west building, the garage along Custis Trail. So,
South facade, west building. Okay, I'll start architecture and design. Commissioner Morton?
I just have a small comment about the architecture as well.
Excellent. Commissioner Steinberger?
Is public art covered in something we've already said?
Can we put it under architecture and design?
Sure.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Hughes?
Clarifying questions on GLUP and
Plans?
overarching plans. Yep.
Okay. All right, let's start with clarifying questions on GLUP, zoning, and planning documents.
Thank you, Commissioner Green. Question for staff, just so I make sure I understand. So is this, it's not in the Rosslyn sector plan, so it's not in the Rosslyn Coordinated Redevelopment District, but is it within the Rosslyn Metro Station area?
Yes.
So it is within the Rosslyn Metro Station area?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Any other clarifying questions on the planning documents? Moving on to architecture and design. Commissioner Schroll?
yes, could the applicant pull up the image you showed of the south facade of the west building? Yeah, this is great. Okay, so I do want to thank the applicant for improving this facade. Your efforts to do that, I think, are commendable. What I will say is there's still that gap there that still looks like a garage from the right-of-way. And so I would encourage you to kind of try to screen the rest of it to the extent possible. And I know you need to vent this, and I know this is a garage, but I would encourage you to try to extend that vegetative screening further if possible. But I do want to thank you for screening this to the extent you already have. This definitely looks a lot better than it did. I do want to thank you for the screening you did on the Nash extension as well. That certainly looks better than it did, and your integration of the historical screening there, I think, is a neat way to do that, and I think also a nod to the history on the site, so I commend you to that, but just want to mention this. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Commissioner Peterson?
How long will it take for the greenery to actually look like this? Because obviously when you plant plants, they don't just suddenly look like this unless they're fake. So is it going to be 5 years or so before it looks like this?
We all know how long nature chooses to take, but these plants have been selected and will be selected based on one, all the plants on your site will be completely native, so I'm answering 2 questions in one. And how long? I think this is a time frame at least within the 2 to 5 year zone.
Can I ask a follow-up on when you say completely native? Do you mean no cultivars?
No, I do not.
Okay.
We have, just for the record, our firm has done a completely native plant garden, the New York Botanical Garden, and did use cultivars, and it's a really good tool to educate the public that there are thousands of natives to use, and it's not just a limited population that will enhance our footprint on this earth.
Yeah, I think we're all really excited to see what you have planned. Thank you. Commissioner Morton, did you have something on architecture and design?
Yes, thank you. And I'd also like to echo the general comments about how excited we are about the architecture. So I had a question also about the green wall and then a comment. It would be wonderful, if you don't mind, to spend a few minutes explaining under what conditions this wall works, because I know we're always looking for ways to make the green roofs more obvious and more obviously beneficial to the community. Is there something special besides the orientation of this wall that makes it particularly feasible or appropriate? And I'm assuming there's some sort of specific site plan conditions as well about maintaining the wall, right? Okay.
I apologize. I was talking. I should have been listening better.
No problem, yeah.
So I think I heard that what would be the maintenance on that green wall. At the moment, we would be employing a maintenance company to fully replace these walls. And what we have in the system now is the kind of green wall that you're actually replacing plant by plant. And the companies that do that, rather than just growing from the ground up, in our experience, have been really remarkable and great. They are just there, and so the developers have said they're willing to do this, to my knowledge.
And sorry, you missed the first part of the question. Is there something special about this project that makes it more feasible than a typical project? We love to ask for this in like every project, but
And everyone tells us they cannot do this.
Right.
Why? I mean, why? Of course you can.
That's why we're asking. You say you can do this.
Yes, we can. And I think what people are maybe not as knowledgeable about yet is that you can't put interior plants and plug those into that green wall. You have to know what plants are going to be able to thrive, and it's a different palette of plants. Is that answering your question?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'd also just like to echo Commissioner Schroll in endorsing. I really love your expansive view of history. I know that there's a temptation to get sort of nostalgic or very didactic, and I thought you did a really creative and unique job in the screening, and also in expanding the idea of heritage to include natural heritage. I thought was really outstanding, and I hope we see more approaches like that in the future, so thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Steinberger.
Can we go to the image that showed the kind of metallic print, the perforated kind of art image?
On the garage walls?
Yes, thank you. So I guess it's two-part. I love this. I think this is a really creative way, and you really heard what the community and everyone involved in the SPRC was saying with regards to kind of embracing the history of the site. So thank you. I think this is a really creative, kind of wonderful way to pay homage to the location and the history that's been there. I may have just missed it in your presentation. Are these the definitive images you're going to use, or is that still kind of, I'm just curious. There's not a right or wrong answer.
Not necessarily determined yet. We'd probably work with HALRB to finalize them.
I think that's great. I think it might also be an opportunity to have more kind of community feedback, and maybe if you had some suggested images that could be used, put that out for kind of community response. It might be a nice way to kind of engage with the community that's going to be kind of there day to day. But I'm glad to hear you're going to work with the HLRB on that. In terms of sort of any other kind of public art on the location, and I love this. I just want to, sorry, is there other art or kind of anticipated? I know this is kind of like the biggest piece of that, but is there anything else that
The other thing we've
Want to speak
talked about, but it hasn't been developed yet, is in the overlook. There's that, especially the covered area, is that we might do some installations up there. We suspect, there may be some artifacts we find during construction. So we don't quite know what it is, but I think there's some space up there and ability to do some more up there. Oh, I'm sorry. Were you asking about public art or just the history?
Oh, I was asking about public art, but I liked your answer on the other.
Okay. I'm sorry. I was referring to the historic elements. I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, that's great to hear. I should have thought to ask that question as well. So thank you for answering it.
Okay.
But in terms of public art, anything else to speak to?
Well, of course, the site plan conditions, condition 17 gives the developer the opportunity to choose either to make a monetary contribution or actually provide on-site art. At this point, we haven't decided.
Okay.
We're working with our landscape architect, and we may incorporate art features, or we may not, but it is an opportunity.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to the discussion of open space sustainability. Commissioner Morton?
So I had a comment about the overlook, and I think I remember from last time you've accentuated that entrance, and I don't remember the word overlook before. So I think I was one of the people encouraging you to make it more obvious that it was, in fact, an accessible space. And I'm just wondering, is that kind of a placeholder, or I'm wondering if there's still something you can do to make it a little bit more welcoming, or would there be some sort of associated signage on the ground plane just to make it clear that, or to reinforce with design cues or signage the fact that that you can enter that?
That was a pretty quick exercise just to kind of show an idea. So yes, we can certainly refine it and develop more signage. Also, to answer another question, we are showing some bike racks down there. You can kind of see them. Yeah, and there are also bathrooms up on the overlook.
Okay.
Is there also a water fountain?
There can be, yes. We haven't gotten that detailed yet, but yes, there actually would have to be by code. So.
And to get at the issue raised by Mr. Corns, it does look like there is still the 4-foot-high concrete wall.
Yes. Yeah. Can you go there, Grossa? Thanks. So that's part of the existing structure that's there. It is tall. One of the things we will be doing, though, as you can kind of see here, is we're going to be putting in pavers that'll be on little pedestals that'll bring you up about 8 inches. So it won't be quite as much of a barrier. I don't know, I went out there again this morning to look at it, and I kind of don't mind that it gives me a little sense of security there. It's kind of, I don't know. I think we could argue different people would have different opinions. Some people, I think, feel more secure having a solid surface there. I do think, when you walk up to the edge of it and you lean over it, you see it all. There's another thing that's interesting going on there is you've got the noise. You've got, a fair amount of noise coming off the parkway. And when you go up to the edge, you do perceive that. But on the same hand, you can hear the stream going through this. So that's quite wonderful. But I wonder, if we do go glass, you're going to get potentially a little more noise in there too. I mean, we can study it. It's kind of a point of debate, but if that helps.
Thank you. We just, it's helpful for us to know that you hear our concerns and you're looking into the best way to address them. Others on the open space or sustainability? Otherwise, I have my list. Commissioner Schroll?
I have a question about the connection to the Esplanade.
Transportation, let's do that there. Okay, any more thought on opportunities for a dog run or dog access anywhere on the site?
Oh, we do, I'm sorry, the apartment building on, you can't see it on this image. It's, well, up on the roof on the 12th floor where the building steps down, we have a private dog run for the residents of the apartment. So that's kind of like, come home, the weather's bad, it's late at night, you can take your dog up there and let him out. And there's actually a dog spa just inside there. So that's addressing that issue. We did, throughout the process, we talked about putting one over to the side of the garage, but we got a bunch of pushback because it didn't meet the requirements. So we decided, okay, there, I'm sorry, Graciela brought it up. You can see that little patch of green there would be the dog run area. So what we're going to do is just have a series of dog stations around. We've got a lot of places you can walk your dog, all the way around the site. So a series of dog waste stations to
That sounds helpful. Thank you, Mr. Walters. How about the issue of the potential public access of the hotel rooftop? I know that was raised during the SPRC, the concern that we're losing the views from the old ballroom.
Maurice, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that we don't have ballrooms or restaurants or large gathering areas up at the top of the hotel anymore, like exists today.
That's
and it's
correct.
actually rooms.
That's correct.
So we have limited ability to have the public up there for views. And I thought that the thought as we went through the process was that the overlook was a good alternative solution, so the public at least does have some views high up.
Thank you. Then I guess my last major question gleaned from the conversation tonight regards the cleanup and maintenance of the Colonial Branch. Mr. Wallace, can you give us a sense of where the conversations with NPS are, or what you expect that process and timing to look like?
Sure. So we engaged with NPS and NCPC when we got the preliminary plan submission, just to start that dialogue early with them. We had one meeting with NPS actually at the hotel. They're very familiar with the conditions of the vegetation and the invasives. They seem like they'd be open to partnering or either through some kind of volunteer efforts or community-based efforts to do something. However, they did not commit to anything at the time when we met with them. We are continuing to, coordinate with them. I think members of the community may even have met with them earlier this week to kind of hike around back there and look at some of the conditions. So again, I think, we're continuing to coordinate with them, but they did not provide any commitment that they would either perform the removal of invasives or allow it. So, but I think it's something we're going to want to continue to talk with them about.
Thank you. And then to clarify, let's assume we get to a point where we have removed the invasives. I assume since it's NPS land, they're responsible for the long-term maintenance?
To my knowledge, yes, and other than some of the efforts that have been done by the community, just on a volunteer basis.
Yes.
I will mention, though, the invasives, the pictures that I showed earlier. I think we're all excited about these potential for views out of the site to the Potomac River in Georgetown, whereas both of the federal agencies are concerned about views into the site. And so they did mention that as, so there's got to be a right balance. So if things are selectively removed, that will be have to be some type of restoration, maybe of more native understory plantings or something. But we'll just need to continue to coordinate with MPS on that effort.
And one follow-up on this, how will the community be updated as to the status of these discussions?
That's a good question. I guess we would encourage the applicant, the developer, to continue those conversations post-county board approval and include, those members of the community that are interested in helping out and improving this area. But we don't have a site plan condition or anything that
Yeah, I
would
understand.
require that, any kind of off-site improvements on
Right.
MPS property. So it's really subject to their review and approval.
Thank you very much. Anything else? Yes, Commissioner Bagley?
So what if, could you give us do we have a sporting chance with NPS? Do we have a maybe? And I know I don't want to put you on the spot because you've done a lot with this, but just for those of us who are just kind of curious, I mean, you talk to them a lot. I mean, maybe, kind of, we should be hopeful, or we should be thinking what Plan B could be?
Yes, you are correct. We have been in touch with them quite a bit, and we have received a letter, which you all should have seen. But as you see in the letter, their main concerns have not really been about what's happening down at the ground plane, but more about the height of the buildings and the visual impact to the parkway. However, they have expressed that they are open to continuing this conversation. But again, I think that would have to be something that happens post-county board approval. I'm sure if there's any other correspondence that's been had with MPS outside, of our contacts, either by the community or the applicant, I'm not aware of those. But if anybody wants to add anything, I'd welcome their input. But
So in your observation, do you think that they would allow it at least? They may not want to be responsible for it, but they might allow it?
from what I gather, they're open to it. But again, we don't have any confirmation at this point.
And then another follow-up. So, applicant, what do we do if, they give us, you can do it, but we're not going to help or anything? What do we do? I mean, do we have any sort of backup plans or, just looking at the nature of the invasive species back there, I recognize that they are concerned about the views in, but sooner or later, just by nature, everything's going to fall down anyway, given the nature of the invasiveness, I would guess. So I just would like, just from the community who's going to be living there, do we have a plan B? I mean, I know this is going to sound weird. I have a house in Michigan, and they send goats out to eat your invasive vines. It's very easy. It's good for the goats. It's good for the environment. So I'm just saying that, we ought to be thinking about as many things as we can here to, because it's in the public realm. It's a spectacular setting. We want to be able to see out. So what do we do?
I'll just make a quick comment. I think to the extent that the county board can make this a priority and maybe influence the National Park Service, I think that would be extremely helpful. I can say I think that the reception we've gotten from them has been quite good. We really, really want that bike connection. So we're going to really make sure that that happens. That's a very important aspect of the plan. And the Fort Myer, they don't, the open space area at Fort Myer, they don't do anything with that. I have a feeling that we're going to be successful. That's just my gut feeling. I think we're going to be successful because I think that really adds to the plan and also just enjoying the George Washington Parkway and the natural setting of the property.
Thank you. Anything else on this, the open space sustainability, or? I have that under transportation. Would you like to move on to transportation? Commissioner Schroll, do you have anything on transportation?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Walsh, you just kind of mentioned that you think you'll be successful in talking to MPS about the space off of Fort Myer, the bike connection to the Esplanade. Can you inform us sort of your the status of your conversations and how that relates to the 3 options that are in the staff report?
Repeat the question again.
So in the staff report, there are these kind of 3 options for the bike connection from the Esplanade. And I was wondering if you could kind of inform us what your conversations have been so far with NPS. And maybe this is better directed to.
It is.
Okay, to staff. I was wondering if staff could inform us sort of the status of the conversations with NPS about the bike connection from the Esplanade.
Sure. So we provided them with an exhibit like what you see here on the screen showing the preferred concept. And again, this concept was shown throughout SPRC as well and is the preferred design. In their letter, which you'll see, they have requested the removal of that driveway entrance off of Fort Myer Drive. And they were pretty vague in that they just said that they wanted that area to be restored back to landscape. And then the final coordination and design of that would be something that the developer will need to work with them on post-county board approval and ultimately get consensus on a design, including this bicycle connection. But then they would then go to the National Capital Planning Commission for final approval. And we've built in flexibility by providing these alternatives, which you note in the staff report. And then we've also included a special site plan condition, which also allows flexibility in the event that NPS does not approve that connection in time for the applicant to pull building permits. Right. But again, they have, both NCPC and NPS have said they are open to all these ideas. They just could not give us any confirmation before this meeting tonight or the county board. We'll continue to coordinate with them going forward.
That's good. Thank you for that update, Mr. Wallace. Heartening to hear that that's kind of where things stand. And I did see those conditions 56, 57 that do allow that flexibility. So I appreciate that and thank staff for their work and the applicant as well. We certainly want to have the connection however we can get it to have the Esplanade. So it's good that that's still an option given where things stand. So.
Other transportation?
Yeah, I have just 2 quick other ones. Mr. Sellen, with the location of the CABI, the Capital Bike Share Station on site, which is great, I'm glad that that's there. It is slightly above grade, correct? About 5-6 feet, something like that?
As currently designed, yes. It's our goal to see that it is at grade, so that could change post 4.1.
Okay.
And it's our goal to see that it is at grade.
Excellent. That's good to hear. And then the last comment or question. So the Lee Highway and Fort Myer Drive intersection is going to see a lot more pedestrian traffic going to the metro after the grade-separated connection comes down. Has there been any further discussion about any pedestrian an improvement at that intersection or signal timing? I know that the VDOT has control over that intersection, but we're wondering, Mr. Sullivan, if you could speak to anything that's occurred.
Well, I think the first thing to acknowledge is that we and VDOT jointly are very nearly completed with the Custis Trail improvement. And what that's done is we've taken an entire lane out of Lee Highway. If you've crossed that intersection recently, it's really narrow. It's 22 feet wide. That's not to say that it's not, it's still a busy intersection. There is also a no turn on red for southbound Fort Myer Drive. One of the things that we did was we looked at what are the things that we can do at this intersection, and then we went back and saw, oh, well, actually, that's already been done. So there's great signage. The intersection has already been narrowed. One of the things that we are looking at, and we do control the signalization there, is can we put a leading pedestrian interval there? And what that is that the green for the pedestrian comes on before it does for vehicles. That's something that we haven't yet determined if we can do that. I think that we might be able to do that, and that would definitely be advantageous and safer for pedestrians to begin to get out into the intersection before vehicles begin making their turns. Beyond that, I'm not sure. We have done a lot over the past 3 years to make that intersection safer at that leg of the crossing. Beyond that, the fact that there are just a lot more pedestrians and bicyclists there, just the presence of more people there in itself makes it a lot safer and a lot more welcoming for people to be crossing and gathering there.
That's great. Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Yeah, I did note in the staff report the reduced crossing width, and that's great. I had, I think, posed to you earlier in the process a pedestrian scramble phase at there, and I do think that the pedestrian having that lead is certainly a good first step, and I'm encouraged to hear you're considering that. The one thing that I noticed when we were there on site for some of these SPRCs was that intersection didn't appear as safe at night, that it's probably easy to cross during the day and there's good sight lines, but pedestrians crossing in the evening, I saw a few almost get hit. And so just maybe something to consider either as part of this process with the kind of lighting plan or in the future for future county projects, just ensuring there's enough light at that intersection would be helpful.
And we can look at the photometrics as well.
That's great. Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Appreciate it.
Commissioner Peterson?
Hi. I first wanted to say I do really like the design of the building. I think it's beautiful. It has lots of biophilic elements that I like. I am concerned about the two entrances to the residential and hotel projects that are on Lee Highway that are going to pass over the Custis Trail. This was mentioned in the staff presentation that you guys are looking at ways to mitigate this. This would be one of my biggest concerns because I used to bike on Custis Trail coming from Courthouse down the hill to Fort Myer and then up into DC. And one of the big problems here is that since the people on Lee Highway are driving west and people are coming from Arlington down through into DC, the drivers are just looking left to decide if it's safe to pull out, but people are coming from the right. And so if people are riding their bikes or running or jogging, the people coming out of this development aren't going to be looking right where everybody's coming from. And so I know you mentioned that you might have a sign or something, but that doesn't seem adequate since there's a lot of actually projects like this on my bike ride to work, and I regularly almost get hit by cars in this exact kind of situation. So I think we do need to make sure that, there's two opportunities now for bikers and joggers to get hit because people are just looking one direction since the cars are just coming from one direction. So can you talk about other ideas that you have besides just signs to make sure we don't have, this is a highly trafficked pedestrian and bike area, so thank you.
Yes, we are aware of that. We know that this is the most traveled bike trail in the county. And, you know, we're proud of that, and we want to see it safer. And we know that the Custis Trail improvements have done a lot to make it safer and also more popular. We are looking at the kinds of things that we can do to make sure that it continues to be safe. We also, one of the things that we did look at through this process was, what is the crash history here at these entrances, at all the entrances to the site, including the one that's being closed? And we looked at what we have is 2013 through 2018 inclusive. And while it doesn't account for the anecdotal, the near misses that everyone has seen, there are no crashes that involve vehicles and pedestrians or vehicles and cyclists. Now, that's not to say that nothing can occur and that there are not the near misses, but it does speak to the fact that there is a certain level of safety and that there is a certain level of awareness on the part of the cyclists and the motorists, even though we know that this is a hotel and that these people may not be familiar with the fact that they're crossing a trail. So we are looking at, I mean, the tools that we basically have are signage, striping, other markings, things that, sensory things beneath your tires, the things that the county can do, we have tried in the past, are signalization for the trail itself. We're not certain that that would work. That's not something that we would impose on the applicant. That's something that we would do ourselves because we have control over the trail. So we would look at both the trail and at the entrances to the site. I think at this point, what we would like to do is to do some monitoring. The fact is that the trail is not yet complete. It's about 95% complete. In about May, we think that the entire trail system from Lynn Street all the way to Oak will be complete. We will see how it operates with all of its signage, all of the lighting that's to be done. Everything will be in place. We'd like to see how that operates. We'd like to see how it operates once the entire project is working and is open. Because as I've said, our staff, the folks who worked on this trail, the consultant team, we all put our heads together and looked at what can we do. We're not really sure beyond what has been put into place because there is signage, there is striping, there's markings, there's rumble strips, there's lighting. So is there more that can be done? I'm not positive. So we will continue to look at it. We will continue to monitor. That's all I can say.
Thank you, Mr. San. Mr. Barrow, did you want to add something?
Yes, I'm very familiar with that portion of the trail. I think part of the issue might be the ramp for the overpass that takes you over Lee Highway right now creates kind of a barrier, a visual barrier that obstructs your ability to look. If you're a motorist, say, leaving from the where the hotel is today, it's hard to see to your right just because of that bulk of that wall there that kind of obstructs your visibility. When that comes down, it'll be much easier to visually be able to detect that somebody's coming from that right into that pathway. So I think, and same thing for a cyclist coming down on the trail, they will be able to pick up what the motorist is doing as they're exiting or entering because they'll be able to see them much better. So I think that'll be a big help.
And that does remind me that the entrance at Nash Street will be regraded to be more closer at grade. And so again, there will be less of a grade issue and a better sight line.
That's going to help.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up. I'm not sure that looking at the current traffic patterns on people pulling out onto Lee Highway would be necessarily reflective of a future residence, since people may be flying in and staying in the hotels, since there's great metro access there, whereas here people may be more likely to be driving their own cars. So if there's a way that maybe we can, as soon as the building's up and ready and having people pull out, maybe we can ask the police to do some monitoring there. And, right at the beginning, start ticketing people who aren't yielding to bikers, then maybe that would send a message at the beginning that, you do have to yield to bikers and pedestrians. That's the law.
Sure. And as you recall, there is traffic control at Nash Street. There is a signal at Nash Street, and we do have a stop sign at Mead. So it's not like there's nothing there.
Thank you. Commissioner Lantelmi? Oh, Commissioner Bagley, then Commissioner Lantelmi.
So just for the benefit of the neighbors, this is an ongoing process. You'll be monitoring it, watching as things get built across the street, and with that, everything's being monitored and will continue to be addressed.
That's correct.
Yes.
This is our most important cyclist route in the county, and is 360,000 cyclists use this a year. So we have a very strong interest in maintaining its safety and its viability.
And we appreciate that. Thank you.
I do want to join Commissioner Peterson's comments and observations on that. We had heard that also earlier, those very concerns. I bike it also, and I do know that when coming down the hill, I probably go too fast also. It's just a natural thing to do. So if there's some tactile way that bikes can be, this way you slow down, make it rough or bumps, that might help a little bit also. So I'm glad you're exploring all sorts of different ways of doing it. Changing topics, looking at the promenade, this did come up at SBRC, and I'm not sure whether it's really coming through on any of the renderings. I very much like that you separated out the bike and the pedestrian portion of that. This did come up at SBRC that the bike portion, in order to be truly successful, should really be just bikes and find a way to keep the pedestrians on the pedestrian part and the bikes on the bicycle part so they don't come into conflict. We mentioned how down at the wharf, that's not working very well because the bike path is at the same grade as the sidewalk. If there's some way visually, a slight grade difference between the bicycle part and the pedestrian part, that would be great. Or otherwise have some sort of visual built in to show that the bikes go here, pedestrians go there. It could be built into the pavement itself, signage, whatever, but there should be something that encourages people through design that people will want to walk at the one part and the bikes will naturally just go to the other, and that minimizes conflicts.
Thank you. Anyone else with questions or comments on transportation? If not, I'll go through my list, and Mr. Sullivan, perhaps you can just answer these all at once. Some issues were raised about the left turn from North Oak to Lee Highway and the potential traffic delays that are anticipated at North Nash and North Mead at Lee Highway.
The left turn, that's not changing.
That's not changing?
That's not changing.
Great, thank you.
Right. And okay, so
I believe these were issues raised, concerns raised by the community.
okay, the left, okay, walk me through this again.
The
I'm
other
sorry.
was potential traffic delays at North Nash and North Mead onto Lee Highway.
Okay, right.
Queuing, thank you.
Okay, so that would be going past Gateway Park, so that's onto eastbound. Okay, so this is the yes, the LOSF.
Yes.
So we recognize, and this came up in the Holiday Inn project as well.
Yes.
There are what we have referred to as rolling queues in the eastbound direction of Lee Highway, particularly in the morning peak. And this project will add to that by, I believe it's 7.5 seconds. And I may ask our friends from Wells if you want further information on that. So the LOS in the morning and the level of traffic service is at a failing level in this direction at this intersection between Nash and Fort Myer, and I think it may go all the way probably to the Francis Scott Key Bridge. About 80% of the traffic in the eastbound direction in Rosslyn, particularly in the mornings, is not Rosslyn originating and not Rosslyn without a Rosslyn destination. It is through traffic. So this project will add additional delay. And there are mitigating things that possibly can be done, but we are also aware that this is an ongoing and long-term condition. Our Core of Rosslyn study, which has looked at both short and long-term potential traffic solutions, is aware of this, and it has made recommendations for long-term solutions for this issue. But we recognize that it's an ongoing issue that needs a long-term solution. So while we have some short-term mitigating things such as potential for signal timing, we recognize that this is an ongoing issue.
Okay, thank you. All right, moving on to the issues then of construction and phasing. Some of the questions that were raised in our conversation have to do with clarifying that, and I believe this came up at the last SPRC, all of the staging would actually be on site. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yes, okay. And then some general concern in the community about how we will coordinate all the concurrent development between Holiday Inn, Marriott, Ames, in a way that minimizes the impact on the residents.
I think many of you were present during the Holiday Inn project, and this question came up then as well. And we used examples, and hopefully they're good examples, of Ballston and West Rosslyn. And in Ballston, we had Ballston Quarter, Ballston Exchange, Founders Square, the Ballston Bridge, 672 Flats, 750 North Glebe, and the Mosaic Park. They're all going on concurrently or consecutively and are mostly wrapping up with Mosaic Park being the final project under construction. Now, that was not without pain, but we got it done. And hopefully everyone's kind of happy with what's going on in Ballston right now. The RAPS projects are, the school is open, the Pierce is well under construction, the Queens Court, I think it is on its way. I know that there have been some people that were not happy with the process and some of that, but again, we work with these projects that are under, and that is in a very, very tight area. This project, we have quite a bit of separation between this and the Holiday Inn. I think that there will probably be a timing gap as well. Holiday Inn is marching through its permits as we speak. The Ames project is quite a bit behind this one. So we do have that experience. We probably will be timing these permits. We have staff that will be monitoring and working on these. There is, in terms of delivery of equipment and materials, I think the fact that all of this material will be on site, I think is a very strong argument for against some of the concerns that some people may have about this. We have the experience in a lot of these issues that I think can be mitigated.
Thank you, Mr. Sellon. Commissioner Morton?
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up. You're right, this came up a lot in the Holiday Inn case. I'm wondering, I'm heartened by the examples you're giving about Ballston and West Rosslyn, which seem challenging, but I wonder if you can be a little more specific for the community. You're saying you got it done, but can you give like a couple of examples of the kind of things that came up and how you solved them for the benefit of the community?
Sure. A lot of times this, often this has to do with traffic. So closures of lanes. Wilson Boulevard has been one that we've had to close a lane, parking. So I can see with this one, Lee Highway. It's not likely that we're going to be closing much of Lee Highway on this one. It's possible that we may take a lane from Fort Myer Drive, because Fort Myer Drive is impacting both the Holiday Inn and the Marriott projects. We would have to monitor if both of these projects would require a lane closure of Fort Myer Drive simultaneously. I think that's an example. Wilson Boulevard was closed. I know that both the Founders Square project and the Ballston Quarter project were competing for lane closures on Wilson Boulevard simultaneously, and our staff was having to work those permits for when those lanes could be closed because we could not allow that to happen at the same time. So we are very aware of what's going on, and we are ensuring that traffic can get through, that there is coordination of maintenance of pedestrian throughways to ensure that people can get through the streets, along the streets, that in the case of Ballston, that the retail businesses had to remain open. Those are some examples of which I am aware because I was helping to, work with our inspecting staff that was on the ground.
I just want to add that there is a standard site plan condition number 10 requiring the developer submit hauling routes of materials to the site to the neighboring civic associations, as well as construction activity and hours. And condition number 13 is community outreach, so there'll be a community liaison. So there will be regular communication with the neighboring community throughout construction, and it's by our standard site plan conditions.
Thank you. Commissioner Bagley, did you want to ask?
Yeah.
Follow-up?
Being very involved in the Ballston thing, staff was great with all of that. One of the developers closed a sidewalk that others had already been closed down, so there were some concerns there. They did that on their own. So what I would like to say, and I don't know if that will affect down there, but it is something that needs to be looked at. So again, my plea to the applicant, as I did back in my Ballston days, is the staff has their responsibility, and there's all the things that are spelled out that you're supposed to do. I would ask that you take it one step further as a good neighbor, reach out to the adjoining developers, have conversations with them, keep the community informed, be very proactive, not reactive. Communication can solve a lot of problems, so I would just ask that you do that, and that will solve things like if somebody's going to close a sidewalk, find out so that we don't close this one too, so that it doesn't result in the community feeling as though some part of the process let them down, which the process was in place on the county side. It was somebody doing something on their own there. So I would really ask you to do that. Thank you.
Commissioner Steinberger?
I would just like to second what Commissioner Bagley said. I think that's extremely important, the communication in that situation, especially when you're dealing with multiple projects going on at the same time. And the community won't always necessarily know who's closed what in that situation. And so even if it's not giving them an access point where the communication is clear so that you can get them answers will go a long way towards you all being good neighbors and a good partner. And since, especially with the hotel site, that's, an ongoing management matter. Like, you want to be good neighbors in that situation. So I would just encourage that. That was a really good point. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's move on to community benefits. Commissioner Bagley, did you want to give some sense of what you were hoping to get out of this
Yeah,
point of the discussion? Thank you.
Mr. Wallace, if you could just spell out again what the community benefits are and why they are a certain way. I want to make sure that there's no misunderstanding on anyone's part as to what those are and how they were arrived at, just briefly. Thank you.
If the commission doesn't mind, I'm going to help Brett
Welcome,
with this
Mr.
one.
Schreiber.
Thank you. So I'm Aaron Schreiber with the Planning Division, and Brett is absolutely capable of this, but I thought I'd just help out since this is his first site plan. When we look at this is from the perspective of, the community benefits, if you want to call them that. In this case, the project, if you're not familiar, this is actually the first site plan from soup to nuts that is actually coming in under the recently adopted zoning ordinance provisions. So this is the first project that began under the new provisions of Section 1559. So in this case, initially, the applicant was not requesting any additional density. So from that perspective, we were looking at it as just standard mitigation of what they were doing. And so it would be a site plan at the CO 2.5 max, which is where it started. So there was no additional density. So there was no any additional mitigations or other type of things that they could contribute to other than just committing to making sure that their site works. So streetscape improvements, some of the stuff on the MPS property, which is what they had to do. They had to remove that driveway, so they had to restore it. But as the project evolved and they sought a little bit more density, and so as you see in the report, at the end of the day, once you kind of accommodate the lead credit that they get for their commitment, both on the hotel and the residential buildings, it really comes down to they were looking for 34 additional residential units. And so that's where you see in the report there are these additional commitments to things such as the bike share station, additional affordable housing commitments, some of the improvements to Gateway Park, as well as the pedestrian bridge removal. So we really kind of started to focus on not just what were they doing on site, and then we had the ability to look at how are they earning that additional density while still staying within the height realms.
Okay. Commissioner Hughes?
Thank you, Mr. Schreiber. You're probably best to answer this question. As you pointed out, I had my July copy of 19 of the zoning ordinance, which probably had the wrong 1559 on it. So just help me understand from staff's perspective the cash contribution of 1.750, and you'll excuse me, I was reading my July one when I was preparing. This was the one on my iBooks, so I'm ashamed of myself not keeping up with the January one. How did we come about the cash contribution? What was the considerations with staff, given the fact that the RCRD, we had a specific annotation in the sector plan that acknowledged that a cash contribution was expected, with the goal therefore being that those cash contributions will be used to identify and promote opportunities in the Rosslyn Metro Station area, in which case this development project falls in, because we identified that the only opportunities in Rosslyn we would have to find affordable housing units was within the Rosslyn Metro Station area.
So this sounds like a familiar discussion we had a few months ago with the Holiday Inn project. And so, again, you're right. And one of the distinctions here with this project is though it's located within the Rosslyn Metro Station area, it is outside of the Rosslyn Coordinated Redevelopment District. So, again, as Mr. Wallace mentioned earlier, we kind of cherry picked some of the ideas from the Rosslyn sector plan, even though they didn't necessarily apply, but especially from some of the design and the form principles, we wanted to try and bring those forward. But in terms of affordable housing, there are very specific goals in the Rosslyn station or the Rosslyn sector plan, as you mentioned. And one of the challenges with Rosslyn is that when we look at it from a valuation perspective, what is the value of a residential unit, especially from a CAF perspective, versus what could we do with with a cash contribution? And so it is a challenge when there is a development project that has the ability to contribute, and we have to kind of make a judgment assessment in terms of saying, do we get greater value out of units, which could be in the range of $400,000 to $500,000 per unit, or could we take a $400,000 or $500,000 dollar contribution and use that elsewhere in the county. Could maybe be not necessarily within the Rosslyn Coordinated Redevelopment District, but other areas. And as you're probably familiar, we're looking at around, $85,000 of, AHIF dollars for, a CAF commitment. And so we have to make those assessments. And in this case, since it's not within the Rosslyn Coordinated Redevelopment District, again, we looked at this. They are required by the ordinance to provide, it's approximately $4 million if they choose the cash route. And in this case, we negotiated a $1.75 million contribution in addition to that. So when we were looking at how do they earn those 34 additional units, again, like with all other projects, we wanted to strike a balance. We wanted to look at achieving some affordable housing goals as well as some open space goals, as well as some pretty significant transportation improvements. It just seemed like a natural here. We didn't want it to be an isolated site, and we saw some opportunities for bike trail connections, taking down the bridge, doing some of those other things. So I think it is, again, it's a balanced approach. But when you pair that $1.75 million contribution to the $4 million on the base, should they choose the cash contribution, that's a pretty significant improvement, which is actually on par or pretty close to the commitment that was done with the Rosslyn Holiday Inn project, and that's actually in the RCRD. So I think we were able to achieve a lot here.
Madam Chair, I'm going to continue to follow up on that question. Mr. Schreiber, you're probably still best answered. I'm going to take one quick guess, as you just pointed out, at the cost of the unit, that the applicant's not going to choose the 20 on-site units and is going to choose the $4 million cash contribution, which I believe is a separate condition within the zoning ordinance, not 15.59. So I want to restrict the conversation specifically to 15.5.9. So I presume Section C of their submitted affordable housing plan for the project involves a 0 as the number of on-site committed affordable units they propose. Is that correct?
Yes, they are not proposing any on-site units at this stage.
And as a result of that, how has staff at all identified any potential projects, not necessarily to be disclosed this evening, to which are in the Rosslyn Metro Station area or nearby that could be a recipient of the 1.75 additional money on top of the base AHIP contribution?
No. Excuse me. No, not at this stage. What we typically do is, we don't know exactly when these monies are coming in. So, cash contributions to AHIF are held in a separate account, and then they are distributed through the county's NOFA or other AHIF distribution processes.
Understood. And Mr. Schreiber, as you so eloquently said earlier, we will look elsewhere in the county to how we can provide those, which again will go later to my comments with respect to the motion making and how I will go to support this. But I just have a question for the applicant this evening. Have you made your decision with respect to the base zoning ordinance and which way you were going to go, whether it's cash, on-site, or nearby?
At this point, I think we're leaning toward a cash contribution.
That would be the smart business decision, absolutely. I'm not ignorant to that fact. My point being, for my fellow commissioners, we are always stuck within our zoning ordinance and what we allow ourselves. And within the site plan process, again, this evening, we see a 6.75 cash contribution without any locations to take it.
Thank you, Commissioner Hughes, for making that point. We have heard that several times this week. Commissioner Bagley?
So just to follow up, Mr. Schreiber, because the developer in this case was not asking for any change in the zoning or any change in the GLUP, that would perhaps, from a community standpoint, looking at the benefits, another development that would request that there might be expected more community benefits. Would that be accurate?
Well, again, in this case, since they are not located within the Rosslyn Coordinated Redevelopment District, they really have no rights or opportunities to them to seek additional density, or excuse me, a different zoning classification, and by that I mean rezoning to the CO Rosslyn District. As Mr. Wallace mentioned, one of the after-action items from the Rosslyn Sector Plan was doing this North Gateway study. There was no assumption or recommendations that we would necessarily expand the RCRD. We were just going to look at it. However, with the revisions to Section 15.5.9 of the zoning ordinance, one of the things was that the density cap was removed, and so what then becomes the regulator is height. Now, there was additional density that this applicant could have, sought, but this is where they were at. And so again, it was 34 units. Doesn't mean that they couldn't have done more. It's a pretty large site, but that's just where they fell.
Thank you. We have one last item based on our listing of things we wanted to discuss, undergrounding of the utility poles. Before we get to that, was there anything that we'd missed in the earlier discussion? Commissioner Lantami, then Commissioner Morton.
Thank you. Yeah, there is one thing. I've been looking at this rendering right in front of us of the site, and it's, it strikes me how much green there is, and especially given the earlier renderings. At grade level, the whole concept of trying to reflect design elements from the Potomac and the gorge, I think is brilliant. It really helps tie the site into where its biggest feature, which is being right next to the river. Despite the pomegranate colored tulips not being quite native, but they're okay. But what strikes me here is there's this whole, right at the center, there's this big spot that's conspicuously not green, and I'm not talking about the top of the old hotel, because I get it's an old building, trying to repurpose is always a challenge. The apartment buildings on both sides, their roofs have uses, they're green, they're integrated with the site, but the roof of the ballroom, and the new structures, there's such a missed opportunity. It looks from all the renderings that they will be nothing more than crushed stone. And you have two facades of the hotel and one facade of the apartment building, which are going to be looking straight down on this. It's a huge feature, and it's just, it's so discordant from the way you've thought through the rest of the site that I'm wondering, isn't there something that you could do that would make it, tie it in more to the overall aesthetic of where you have gone with the rest of the site? And I'm sort of throwing that out to you as a challenge, because I think if you really want to complete the biophilic nature of this site, those roofs should be different than just crushed stone.
We'll continue to look at that. One of the issues we have is the long spans of the ballroom kind of limits what can be done up there. So we've heard the comment, and we'll study.
Thank you.
One more thing.
Yes.
I'm sorry, there is one thing that was pointed out that we didn't talk about is on the side of the ballroom. Again, this is on the ground plan. There is a kind of another green wall there too, also.
Wonderful.
Commissioner Morton.
Thank you. Just a quick question. I know this is a harder question than it sounds, but could you, to the extent you can be clear, like what does the additional contribution to Gateway Park mean in terms of how far along are we to the ultimate realization, and what else do we need in order to get that started? Thanks.
Actually, Mr. Gonzalez is here from Department of Parks and Recreation, and I'm sure he can speak more to park planning than just dollars. So, Walter.
Good evening, Walter Gonzalez with Department of Parks and Rec. So in terms of Gateway Park and the contribution, as you know, currently the CIP for the fiscal year of 19 to 29 has laid out what the plan is for Gateway Park. And as of now, we're continuing with what's laid out in the CIP, but as you're also aware right now, the CIP is going through a review process, which we encourage community to be involved and let people know, especially board members know, of what importance Gateway is to them. And maybe through those talks, this process could be moved up forward. But as of now, it's what's in the CIP that we're following.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. Commissioner Morton, did you have a follow-up? Okay. All right. Then let's go on to what I believe is the last item for our discussion, the undergrounding of the utility poles. Commissioner Bagley?
So having sat through all the meetings and hearing all the concerns and actually meeting with the neighbors individually and in my observation, exhausting what staff had available to address this. I appreciate, and I think I understand that it is not something that would be in the realm of community benefit for this, which we all kind of agree to that. And I'm glad to hear that that the staff and the county manager will continue to work with the neighbors to address this, and I'll also have a motion when we get to that part about that. So I do appreciate the effort that you went, not just for them, but on the backside. I didn't know anything about the underground utility fund. I didn't know how it worked. I didn't know the areas. I didn't know anything about it. So, and both of you went to great extent to explain that, and I understand it. I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page here, and then we'll move forward possibly with a motion, and that you're still willing to look at other alternatives for them. So thank you.
Commissioner Hughes?
Thank you. A question for staff. This evening in our public testimony, we heard that the above-ground utility poles are servicing mainly and maybe exclusively the small office complex that is currently used by the Air Force Association, I believe. Is that correct? Does staff know that for a fact? Can they confirm that at all?
We can't confirm that, but again, as Mr. Wallace mentioned, we think that this is something that obviously the community has raised as an issue, and I know that they've recently met with the county manager, who has committed to continuing these discussions outside of the purview of this site plan and really finding a more appropriate vehicle to look at what are opportunities for the county to engage not just the homeowners, but also other parties that may be able to assist in undergrounding those utilities. So that's something that we will continue to do outside of the site plan in the future.
One follow-up, Madam Chair, if you don't mind. To that question, if it is the only servicing that one building, if that building were to redevelop in any way, shape, or form, would it not be required to underground those utilities as part of its mitigation?
So from a utility undergrounding standpoint, we typically require utilities that are located on the property to be undergrounded. And so typically you'll underground what's on your site or on the periphery, or what is necessary to underground in order to serve those other utilities that are going under. In this case, these poles are located on public property off-site of Oak Street. And so we'll continue to investigate, what those lines are servicing and actually whose property they're on. It's a little bit squishy right now in terms of whether that's on MPS property or county property, and whether there's even an easement that's protecting those. So those are all the things that we'll continue to look at. But really, utility undergrounding is what's on your site, unless you have to underground under other poles in order to service what you're improving. And we've had that on other projects, but that's been in some extreme situations because of other, storm drains in the area, and they've had to, go off-site one or two properties to make that happen.
Thank you. Seeing no other discussion, I believe we're ready for a motion. Commissioner Bagley?
I have a few of them. Okay. Our first motion is, I move the Planning Commission recommend to the County Board to adopt the attached ordinance for Site Plan Number 53 to renovate the existing Key Bridge Marriott Hotel with approximately 445 hotel units and construction of 3 new residential buildings containing a total of approximately 451 residential units, with modifications of use regulations to include required parking, increased density, and other modifications as necessary to achieve the proposed development plan located at 1401 Lee Highway, RPC numbers 16-004-002-003-004-005 and -006, subject to the conditions of the attached ordinance.
I'll second.
Motion by Commissioner Bagley, seconded by Commissioner Lantelmi. Is there any discussion? Commissioner Hughes?
Thank you, Commissioner Gearing. For my fellow commissioners this evening, it won't be a surprise after our last night's meeting, but this is our second now proposal here along Lee Highway. using the site plan process, and the only thing that comes out of it through the community is cash contributions from our development community. That is wonderful if we have sites that can be developed. But we rely on our nonprofit developers. APA, AHC, Wesley are examples. They are big landowners in this county, but the land they own is not along Lee Highway, which leaves us with the challenging structure of trying to figure out where does the money end up going through that NOFA process. So that is the question that we all have to consider and think about. Until we have a method and mechanism in which we can reliably trust that our county builds an inclusive community, I am not comfortable supporting this site plan. And for all of those reasons, I will not be supporting it this evening.
Thank you, Commissioner Hughes. Ms. Badger, would you please include the essence of this discussion in our letter?
I will do my best.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Seeing none, we're ready for a vote. All in favor of the motion? All opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes. Thank you. Another motion?
I move the Planning Commission recommend to the County Board to adopt the attached resolution amending the Master Transportation Plan, MTP Map, to add new sections of North Nash Street and North Mead Street on the subject property north of Lee Highway.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Bagley, seconded by Commissioner Schroll. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Are there any other motions?
Yes.
Go ahead. Shall we go with Commissioner Peterson?
Okay, my first motion.
Yes.
I encourage any suggestions for improvements. The Planning Commission recommends the County Board instruct the County Manager to conduct, in the year after this project is completed, a study of the bike and pedestrian safety on the Custis Trail as a result of the new traffic generated by this project, in particular at the new crossings of the Custis Trail to Lee Highway. And Ms.
Second.
Johnson, I emailed it to you.
Second.
Got it.
Okay, motion by Commissioner Peterson, seconded by Commissioner Hughes. Would you like to discuss your motion?
Well, just the points that I made earlier, I'm concerned about the safety at those two crossings. There's one crossing now that is just for hotel residents, but with the increased residents that would be living there year-round and possibly driving to work, I think that the pedestrian and bike safety coming from Arlington into DC is at risk for people turning right onto Lee Highway.
Any other discussion? Commissioner Hughes?
Thank you, Commissioner Green. I just would like to further state that, as we heard from staff this evening, it's an area under constant monitoring, so therefore it should not require any adjustment to the staffing plan already proposed.
A very good point, Commissioner Schroll.
Yeah, I mean, I think as we make these motions, we need to be cognizant of kind of staffing, but it does sound like this is going to be done. I'm a little kind of wary sometimes of making motions when staff has already sort of agreed to do it. And I have some concerns about some of the other motions that are before us. So I think I'm going to abstain, not because I don't agree with the sentiment, but because, staff has sort of already agreed to do it.
Understood. Commissioner Hughes?
Belts and suspenders. Belts and suspenders from the old times.
Commissioner Peterson, want to have the last word on this?
I don't know what that means, but I also I also just want to acknowledge that staff does have a lot of competing priorities. New things are coming up all the time, and while they may very well intend to look at it, and I appreciate that you guys acknowledge this is a very highly trafficked area, I just want to make sure that the county board has this on their radar, and they make sure with competing priorities that this one always rises to the top.
Okay.
Just out of clarity, it's Commissioner Giacomini's favorite terms, and so in her absence, I want to say belts and suspenders.
Put those in spirit. Thank you. Okay. With that, we'll take a vote on this. All in favor of Commissioner Peterson's motion? Opposed? Abstentions? Did you get that, Ms. Badger? Thank you. That motion passes. Any other motions? Ms. Bagley, Commissioner Bagley.
And this was written before I was advised that the county manager and staff will work on this, but I will still put it out there. I move the Planning Commission recommend to the county board to direct county staff and the applicant to work with Palisades Park residents to explore opportunities to address the undergrounding of 4 utility poles located near Lee Highway and on North Oak Street.
Is there a second? This motion fails for lack of a second. Thank you. Any other motions?
Yep. Okay. I move that the Planning Commission recommend to the county board to direct county staff and the applicant to work with the National Park Service, NPS, Palisade Park residents to address invasive species removal on NPS land located to the west of this site and along North Oak Street.
Second? This motion fails for lack, oh, I'm sorry. Commissioner Morton seconds that. Okay, thank you. Motion by Commissioner Bagley, seconded by Commissioner Morton. Any discussion on this? Commissioner Hughes and Commissioner Schroll?
Not that I don't at all appreciate the intent of this motion or support it, and I would hope that both Marriott as a good neighbor would want to support the community's efforts to find a volunteer. I can imagine a volunteer Saturday where coffee is put out and you all gather everyone to listen to it. But with respect to a condition within the site plan, I'm not willing to support it with this respect, but I would encourage the applicant and the Marriott itself to be a continual good neighbor to want to find invasive species and opportunities to partner with its neighbors.
I align myself with Commissioner Hughes' comments. Commissioner Schroll?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This kind of falls under my comments to Commissioner Peterson in that Mr. Wallace noted that staff had already been in discussions with NPS about this very topic several times and that there were ongoing discussions. And so I feel like staff's already doing it and sort of unnecessary at this level, at this stage.
Other comments on this motion? Commissioner Lantelmi?
I concur with Commissioner Schroll on this. But I also wonder whether it's possible for the residents of Palisade Park themselves to work with NPS, maybe even to create some group like, Friends of Colonial Run or whatever, that, they could help volunteer to work on these sort of things the way I think the Park Service has for other parks in the area. They have citizens groups that work with them on these things. Throwing that out there as you have some agency yourselves to work with NPS. Certainly having the county board behind you is good, and it looks like staff is definitely working very hard on that. But you yourselves can actually go out and start doing your own lobbying on this, and there's lots of ways you can do that.
Thank you. Commissioner Peterson?
I was just wondering what Commissioner Bagley thought about the staff's response so far. I mean, you still feel like we should have this motion in?
I proposed this motion based on the concerns that the community had brought up. Again, just as a nod to this was a concern of theirs.
Any other discussion? With that, we'll call for a vote on this. All in favor of this motion? All opposed? Any abstentions? This motion fails. Commissioner Bagley?
Back again. I move the Planning Commission recommend to the county board to direct county staff to work with the applicant on the subsequent mitigation of traffic MOT plan for the project and coordinate it with the existing MOT plan for the Holiday Inn site as well as the forthcoming Ames site.
Is there a second? This motion fails for lack of a second. Yes, Commissioner Bagley.
I move the Planning Commission recommend to the county board to direct county staff to implement traffic data studies, including volume and queuing delays for the intersection of North Nash Street and Lee Highway and North Meade Street and Lee Highway to help possible future traffic mitigations.
Is there a second?
I'll second for the purposes of discussion.
Thank you. Motion by Commissioner Bagley, seconded by Commissioner Morton. Would you like to discuss it, Commissioner?
Yeah, just, is this something that goes beyond what's currently anticipated right now?
what we currently have in place are longer-term proposals for the Core of Rosslyn study that look at solutions that would take traffic off of Lee Highway in the eastbound direction. And we have CIP money in the current proposed budget that would do that. They don't look at these specific intersections, but they look at a bigger picture solution that would really look at solving the big picture issue of eastbound, the rolling queue in the eastbound direction in the morning, which is the real problem on Lee Highway.
Can you clarify longer term?
Post 2030.
Oh, that is quite a bit longer term.
And
Commissioner,
that means actual
Thank you.
construction.
You've
That's-
convinced me to vote for this even.
Commissioner Hughes.
I do not intend to support the motion, mainly because I do know that staff, we talked about it 2015 with respect to the Rosslyn Sector Plan adoptions, the continuing needs for a broader study area, and how impacts in one area of a turn lane may impact this completely unobvious to these particular intersections. So the holistic study that staff has outlined with respect to the core of Rosslyn study, I think is the more important study for staff's attention to be focused on. So therefore, I don't intend to support this motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Hughes. I also don't intend to support the motion, but I have to commend Commissioner Bagley for being so thoughtful with all of these follow-up motions. I think we've just had such a very thoughtful and expansive discussion with staff tonight, understanding where they're coming from on a lot of these issues. And that is why I'm less supportive than I might be. But excellent job with these, Commissioner Bagley. Any other discussion? Then we're ready for a vote on this motion. All in favor of the motion? All opposed? Abstentions? Did you get that, Ms. Badger? Thank you. Any other motions?
For the ordinance of vacation, yes.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, I have to look at this one now. Thank you. The Planning Commission finds that the vacation of two portions of an easement for public street and utility purposes, which portions are adjacent to North Fort Myer Drive and are located on part lots 1 through 7, inclusive Block 14, Rosslyn, known as 1401 Lee Highway, Arlington, Virginia, RPC number 16-004-001, with conditions is substantially in accord with the adopted comprehensive plan or applicable portion thereof, Arlington County, Virginia.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Bagley, seconded by Commissioner Hughes. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll vote on this. All in favor? The motion passes unanimously. You have one more? Thank you.
I move the Planning Commission recommend to the County Board to authorize the Real Estate Bureau Chief, Department of Environmental Services designate to execute on behalf of the County Board the deed of vacation and all other documents or deeds necessary to effectuate the attached ordinance of vacation, subject to approval as to form by the county attorney.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Bagley, seconded by Commissioner Hughes. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? That passes unanimously. Any final motions? That's it, correct? Thank you. Before I let Commissioner Bagley have the last word and reflect on this project, I wanted to thank all of the staff who've worked on this, Mr. Wallace, Mr. Sellen, and tonight, Mr. Schreiber, Mr. Gonzalez, and Mr. Biola. Commissioner Bagley, who had 2 site plans this week, extremely busy, especially for a new commissioner, and did a terrific job. Members of the public for consistently attending the meetings and making the project better with raising your concerns and questions, and then to the development team, the architects, the landscape architects, for celebrating the site and highlighting the history. infusing it with such a brilliant aspect of biophilic design and responding, most importantly, to the issues and concerns that were raised by the community. That is really our responsibility when we hold the SPRC and LRPC meetings, and we're always gratified when we see you participate as effectively as you did. And I agree with the comments you raised yourselves and what we heard from some members of the public, that this project is indeed much better than it was to begin with. So thank you very much. We're looking forward to this. Commissioner Bagley?
Yeah, and on that note, again, this is a process, not perfect. Hopefully, even in the failed motions, you understand that we really are listening to you and really, hello. And I do also want to commend staff again on the hours and the responses and the explanations and things. So, and I'm sorry that I omitted you earlier, Mr. Gonzalez. Thank you for your help with this. And we can't wait to see this project. I hope there'll be like a grand opening and we get invited to come over and see it. I hope that we can see views out, and I look forward to, I probably don't come down to Rosslyn as much as I should, and I think once this is there, I will want to come down and see it. And if you haven't had a chance to go out and look at the hollow back there and the spots beyond, it's really beautiful back there. So thank you all very much.
Thank you. Yeah, does she call that for us? Okay. Does that call up? You see that as a question? Okay. All right. We'll move on to our organizational matters and other business. We have to continue the rest of our meeting, our organizational matters and other business. Please take this discussion out to the hallway. Thank you. May I get a motion to approve the minutes from February?
Before we do that, there's an error.
Inga, thank you for coming.
We're continuing our meeting on organizational matters and other business.
I note that on page, where'd it go? Oh, page 4 of the minutes, under the Public Facility Review Committee report, the sentence seems to be missing half of itself at the end.
Yes.
So I would vote to approve it, subject to that missing sentence being completed.
I'm sorry, I missed that.
Commissioner Natalmy notes that on page 4 of the minutes from the February meeting, we've omitted part of the sentence regarding the PFRC report.
Okay.
Should we just defer till next month? I think that's the most appropriate response, would be to defer the minutes.
We will defer approval of this until the next meeting. Commissioner Steinberger? Yes.
Below that, form-based code, Commissioner Hughes discussed the upcoming item being here by the AWG. Heard?
Heard. I think that we should all take a look at it and review it again at our April meeting.
Thank you.
Will definitely
Excellent
take
idea,
place.
Commissioner Hughes.
Okay.
We will review this and discuss it in April.
I move we defer.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. All right, we'll go into our organizational matters and other business, starting with SPRC. First, I just want to thank Commissioner Morton for preparing that Google Doc and updating it. I find it extremely helpful, and a reminder that everyone is welcome at all of the meetings. This is meant to be a guideline for us so we see who is attending and whether or not we're needed to attend something.
Okay, thank you. If anyone's having trouble with that, please let me know. It's pretty easy, really, if you start clicking on it. I understand that the WIDA process has wrapped up early, so congratulations to Commissioner Patel, who's not with us. And Park Arlington will have its second out of 2 anticipated SPRC meetings on Monday. My co-chair, Jane Siegel, is going to be taking that over for me since I need to be out of town unexpectedly. Coming up that same week, March 19th is the second, right, for AIM Center. And that's kind of it for the immediate future. I had a conversation with Courtney today, who I'd like to note has been super to work with. So I know coming up In the near-term future, we're planning on 101 12th Street that Commissioner Peterson is chairing with Commissioner Gearan. Sometime over the next, say, maybe 4 months, we should be looking at the courthouse landmark project that I'm chairing. Joyce Motors will come up maybe after that, sometime that Commissioner Hughes is chairing. We talked before about, considering having a co-chair. I know some people want them and some people don't, but in the event that you do need to be out of town, like what's happening to me on Monday, I have to go pick up my kids and bring them home from college. Your co-chair can step up. Nonetheless, as I think maybe Commissioner Scholl pointed out yesterday, in the event of something unexpected, probably another commissioner is going to be confident enough to step up. But again, it's something to consider as we're assigning chairs. I think that's it for now. I don't know, are we going to be talking at all about the essential and non-essential today, what we know?
Yes, I'll talk about that at the end of our meeting. Thank you.
So that's really my report. Thank you.
LRPC report, Commissioner Schroll, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A quick report this evening in that our date that was held for next week, March 17th, we don't have a meeting scheduled. So you all get a night back. And we, at this moment, in my discussions with Ms. Brown, we don't have another meeting on the agenda at this moment. So stay tuned, but we don't have an LRPC meeting in the short term.
Thank you. In the absence of Devanshi, Commissioner Patel and Commissioner Weir, who are co-chairing ZOCO, they have asked that I relay a report on their behalf. The committee is expected to meet in April, tentatively on the topic of flexibility for expansions to nonconforming units in any of the multifamily districts, RA 615, RA 818, RA 716, RA 1426. There's a joke in here from Commissioner Weir. This would be an expansion of the 2018 change relating to non-conforming two-family dwellings in R27. So keep that in mind as we go forward. Thank you. Did you chuckle? Yes. He'll be pleased to know that. PFRC report?
Yes, we're still going through the Career Center site. Right now, it looks like the presentation to the school board is being put off from March to April. The architects are working with the school board staff to come up with the costing of the ideas that they have come up with. They have two different estimators that come up. They have to reconcile those, and it's a fairly involved process, which has pushed things off a bit. We won't be having our next PFRC until probably later in the month.
Thank you, Commissioner Lantelmi. Form-based code advisory working group, Commissioner Hughes?
No meeting this month.
Thank you. Okay, my report, I just want to thank everyone for ably sharing our responsibilities. Commissioner Hughes and Peterson for 1900 SPRC, Commissioner Bagley and Commissioner Siegel for artists, Commissioner Bagley for Keybridge Marriott. I think you can get an MVP award this month. Commissioner Lantelmi for picking up the fee increases on Monday, those reports, and Commissioners Weir and Patel for ZOCO. That was the most efficient ZOCO meeting we've had in years. Commissioner Schroll, thank you for co-chairing the Shirlington GLUP with me. I really want to thank everyone for your time and consideration. It's been a really long month in our hearings, and especially our staff, Ms. Badger and Ms. Johnson. We have had 3 meetings this week, and we appreciate you coming back night after night. I had a brief phone call with Mr. Duffy today, and Commissioner Lantelmi and I will have a longer discussion with him tomorrow. The public meeting and gathering guidance has just been released, and we will be getting some more information and working with county staff and leadership to review our schedule of meetings for the rest of March and for April. We'll report back to the full PC. In the meantime, you can see the guidelines that were issued today. especially regarding the query, is the meeting essential? It turns out, per a very brief conversation with Mark Schwartz on Monday, that like the county board, the PC is required to meet in person and accept public comment. So we will be looking at, are there accommodations that we can take to reduce risk? Can meetings be offered in a virtual format? And can meeting space be set up to be configured to reduce risk? With that, we're done, and the commission stands in recess until... We're adjourned. Thank you. Done. We stand in recess until April.
Yeah, we're actually adjourning out of our state-mandated meeting
Adjourned until April.
till next
Learn
month.
something every month. We're adjourned until April. Stop talking. Thank you.
We should get hazard pay if we have to meet.
No, I think they'll figure something out. I think they're just in this discussion point.